Chapter 1642. The space was exceptionally quiet. A silver-haired young man with an extraordinary temperament was suspended in the air in front of Yu Zhengliang. Layers of sword intent whistled around his body. As soon as this person made a move, he forcefully suppressed the 5 human sovereign realm powerhouses of the Gui race, bringing a great impact to the 2 races. Several elders of the Gui race looked at Qin Hao with solemn expressions. Each of their clothes had more or less sword marks, and traces of blood seeped out. Although they were all superficial wounds, they weren't serious. However, as soon as this silver-haired young man appeared, the sword aura he brought suppressed the 4 of them at the same time. Young Master Yu Zhengliang's palm was pierced by a sword. Even if it was a sneak attack, it completely showed his cultivation. This person's sword was extremely extraordinary. Who are you? How dare you obstruct the actions of the Sky Shaker race? One of the elders stepped out and shouted at Qin Hao. His tone of reprimand was quite stern, giving people a sense of deterrence. This was the Gui race. Even if they knew that the other party was a powerhouse, they were still full of courage. It doesn't matter who I am. The world is clear, but there are some shameless lechers who want to harm the innocent. I can't stand it, Qin Hao said calmly. His calm demeanor exuded a deep pressure. He knew that the Gui race was a powerhouse, but he insisted on going against them. This made his background seem even more extraordinary. This person's sword Dao is extraordinary. He may be a disciple of the Juying Sword Palace in the East Continent. Next to him, someone reminded him. Since when did the Juying Sword Emperor manage Penglai? Does he treat the East Sea's Sky Shaker race as heir? The elder sneered sarcastically. Qin Hao was startled. Juying Sword Emperor? How did he get involved with the Juying Sword Emperor? He didn't use his essence soul just now because these Gui race cultivators were very weak and not worthy of his use. Secondly, he was afraid of exposing the Red Lotus tyrannical fire. After all, when he killed Yuya, Qin Hao wasn't in a good state and was injured. He had to use his true ability to kill Emperor Yuan. During this period, Qin Hao's injuries were almost healed. When dealing with a few human sovereigns, some sword qi was enough to deal with them. He disguised himself as a sword cultivator and avoided suspicion of killing Yuya. But he didn't expect that the Gui race would mistakenly think that he was from the Juying Sword Palace. The sword sect's sword qi is indeed somewhat similar to Juying palaces. Qin Hao was overjoyed. In the past, his swordsmanship was too overbearing and ferocious, focusing on killing with one strike, revealing the aura of an emperor. Ever since he met Wuk, he had learned a lot of sword techniques from him. Slowly, his swordsmanship had undergone a huge change, becoming more and more colorful. Now that the other party had mistaken his identity, he would make the best of it and temporarily use the Juying Sword Emperor as his backer. Thinking of this, Qin Hao's confidence swelled a little. He coughed a few times and said, "My actions have nothing to do with the sect or master. They come from my heart and I can't help it. Don't exaggerate." It seems that this person really is a disciple of Juying Sword Palace, an old man from the Gui race said in shock. Furthermore, his status is not low. He was able to suppress me the moment he made his move. His sword Dao is extremely strong. He might be the personal disciple of the Sword Emperor. Could it be Feng Qianli? The 4 old men from the Gui race looked at each other. At this moment they hesitated. With a background like the Juying Sword Palace, the silver-haired cultivator was not someone the Sky-Shaking clan could take away as they wished. They had heard that the Juying Sword Emperor was extremely protective of his disciples. If this person was really his first disciple, Feng Qianli. Immediately, the 4 old men looked at Ming Zhengliang and shook their heads slightly. It seemed that they would not be able to take the Huang Ling thrust from Shuo Kai's hand. "What is your name? Tell me your name. I will go to the Sword Palace to seek justice from the Sword Emperor." Yu Jingliang's eyes were filled with anger. His palm was pierced by a sword. The damage to his face was small, but if it was not healed, his hand would not be as flexible as before. Moreover, he was unwilling to let Shuai Kai go so easily. Is my name important? I am just a rogue martial artist. My actions are all based on personal preference. No matter what the result is, it has nothing to do with the Sword Palace. All right, if you want to ask for it, go ahead. Don't stay here and dirty my eyes. Qin Hao said coldly. Yu Zhengliang was so angry that he wanted to vomit blood. Although he was not a direct disciple of the family, he was still one of the top geniuses of the side branches. Even the Tsang Yao Emperor appreciated him. He had never been humiliated like this before, being insulted by a disciple of the Juying Sword Emperor. Moreover, this guy was so shameless that he said he was not a disciple of the Sword Palace. Who was he trying to fool? Yu Zhengliang, if you want to fight, then fight. If you don't, then get lost. Shuai Kai's brother said in a deep voice. As he spoke, he stood next to Qin Hao and nodded at him, giving off a feeling of closeness. They were obviously acquaintances. Sir, thank you for today. I will go to the Sword Palace of the East Continent another day and ask the Sword Emperor for help. I will also reward you properly. Shuai Kai's brother secretly transmitted his voice. It's nothing. Brother Shuai, you don't have to take it to heart. The Gui race is despicable. A gentleman will naturally take action. There is no need to reward. Qin Hao was magnanimous and upright, full of righteousness. This made Shuai Kai's brother have a good impression of him, and he was even more moved. Young master, let's go. On the other side, the elders around Yu Zhengliang began to persuade him. The Juying Sword Emperor's direct disciple was here. Even if it was only one person, they could no longer touch Shuai Kai. Good. I will remember your face. I hope that one day, you will not fall into my hands. I will make you pay 100-fold. Yu Zhengliang cursed fiercely and stared at Qin Hao seriously. Only then did he leave with the crowd. A disciple of the Sword Palace? Thank you for just now. Shuai Kai smiled and stepped into the void, slightly thanking Qin Hao. Behind her, the Shuai clan warriors all cheered. It was the first time they saw Yu Zhengliang suffer. Miss Shuai Kai, there is no need to thank me. If this person was in the East Continent, I would have ended him with my sword. Qin Hao looked at Yu Zhengliang's back with a cold and arrogant gaze. However, this sentence was sincere. If they were in the East Continent, those 100 Gui race warriors would not have been able to escape. But now, they were still in the Sky Shaker clan's territory. He could not openly kill them. It would not be good for himself, and it would also affect the Shuai clan. I have heard that the disciples of the Sword Palace are full of righteousness. Now that I have seen it, it is true. Let's go back to the clan. I will take good care of you. Shuai Kai's brother laughed heartily. At this moment, in the void far away, a turbulent emperor light suddenly flew over. The platinum flame was particularly conspicuous as it streaked across the sky. It quickly appeared in front of everyone. Qin Hao could not help but be vigilant. Don't be nervous. It is my clan, Shuai Kai said. As soon as she finished speaking, the emperor light dispersed, revealing 3 figures. They were all outstanding youths, and the face of the leader was very familiar. It was Guxiu. I was wondering why Yuan Hun was so familiar. So it was you. Qin Hao looked at Guxiu and smiled. When they did not meet, he could not think of him. Now that they met, he could recognize him at a glance. Guxiu suddenly saw Qin Hao in the East Sea and was also shocked. He said in disbelief, "Senior brother Qin." Qin Hao hurriedly coughed to interrupt him. Guxiu was smart and immediately understood. He changed the topic and said, "So it is brother Chu-san. Long time no see." "What? Your Highness knows him? I was just about to introduce him." Shuai Kai was a little speechless. It was not easy to meet an extraordinary disciple of the Sword Palace. No matter what, she had to show off to His Highness. Unexpectedly, the two of them knew each other. Like I said, Your Highness is knowledgeable. Heroes of the same kind gather in the East Continent. How could you not know the people of the Sword Palace? So your name is Chu San. Shua Kai's brother patted Qin Hao's shoulder. Don't be rude. Gu Xiu's face suddenly tightened as he berated. He had never dared to slap eldest senior brother Qin Hao's arm before. Hey, when did senior brother Qin Hao become a follower of the Jueying Sword Emperor? It doesn't matter. Qin Hao didn't care and smiled. He took 2 steps forward and carefully looked at Gu Xiu. The other party had changed his clothes and was quite royal. So your name is Shua Xiu. Your real identity is the prince of the Shua clan. I also want to reduce unnecessary trouble. Shua Xiu smiled. The signs of the divine palace were so dangerous. If he knew how to hide, he would have a better chance of survival. Qin Hao nodded. In fact, not only Gu Xiu, but most of the disciples of the divine palace deliberately hid their origins. So far, Qin Hao hadn't figured out the details of the 300 disciples of the same sect. Brother Chu San, how did you come to Penglai? And Senior? Shua Xiu's words were stuck in his throat. It's a long story. A trace of pain flashed across Qin Hao's face. Then let's go back and talk. Come, I will take you to see my father and ancestors. In the East Sea, no one can bully my brother. Shua Xiu said. He could see from his brother's face that he had encountered trouble. No, let's talk in private. Qin Hao waved his hand and Shua Xiu nodded and followed. 2 streams of light pierced the sky and disappeared into the clouds in the blink of an eye. No one knew where they went. What's the situation? The 2 youths who followed Shua Xiu stared at each other. It's a long story. My brother and I were almost robbed by Tai Zhengliang. Fortunately, Brother Chu San came to solve the crisis. Shua Kai replied and looked at the clouds. His Highness Shu Xiu had a noble status and was on an equal footing with Feng Ye. He was the great-great-grandson of the sea-dumping ancestor. His Highness was acquainted with an outstanding talent. Alas, fate made fools of people. Just as she had a good impression of him, the heavens poured cold water on her. Someone like Chu San must have many admirers and many beautiful women around him. She had no hope. At the same time as Qin Hao and Shua Xiu left, somewhere in the void, there was an extremely majestic and resplendent figure who was silently watching everything that was happening. Emperor Song Yao's snow-white hair fluttered in the wind. There was no emotion in his eyes. He saw Qin Hao make a move and guessed that the other party had concealed most of his cultivation. His realm was probably not low. Sword cultivator, a disciple of Senior Jueying? Song Yao ordered coldly behind him. Draw a picture of this person and send it to the Sword Palace. In addition, pay close attention to this person's movements. Yes, Emperor. Several Yuan large powerhouses surged with platinum essence qi and flew in different directions. The division of labor was clear. Song Yao took one last look at the clouds where Qin Hao disappeared before his figure slowly disappeared. Feng Yu was killed, and the murderer had not been found. Judging from the aura left at the scene, it should be a powerhouse who was good at fire spells. His spells were extremely powerful and his flames were unparalleled. However, he would not let go of any suspicious person because of this. Although the silver-haired warrior used sword qi, he did not release his elemental source spirit. Perhaps it was because his clansmen were too weak for him to use, but Emperor Song Yao still wanted to investigate. What if the silver-haired warrior cultivated the Sword of Flames? At this moment, on an inconspicuous deserted island in Penglai, 2 silhouettes with outstanding bearings sat on the reef, gazing at the vast sea. Sister Han, Wuk, Su Jin, and the 9-headed serpent have been separated. Senior sister's whereabouts are also unknown. There are no clues at all. Senior brother, even if I use my power, it will be difficult to find them in a short period of time. Shuo Xiu was somewhat helpless. No need to look for them, I believe they will be fine. Qin Hao replied, telling the other party what had happened along the way. He took the initiative to conceal Muri's death. Senior sister could not die. Otherwise, the disciples of the Divine Palace would be in chaos. Qin Hao knew better than anyone how great the threat of the evil soul was and what kind of fear it brought to everyone. Therefore, even if Muri was dead, he must let her live in everyone's hearts and have a false backer. As for finding Wuk and the others, Shuo Xiu's ability was limited. He was a tyrant in the East Sea, but in the East Continent, the Shuo clan was not too strong. There were many places that the Shuo clan did not dare to offend. Who exactly is it that can fight on par with senior sister? Shuo Xiu was shocked. Was there such a peerless powerhouse in the East Continent? I'm not sure. Just the aftermath of the battle caused us to suffer heavy injuries and blasted us all the way to Penglai. Qin Hao still had lingering fear. The Tao might of thunder that fell from the sky was too terrifying. But somehow there was a different feeling. It seemed that the other party only seriously injured them and did not intend to kill them. Otherwise, according to that person's cultivation, everything could be destroyed with a flick of his finger. Qin Hao and the others had no way to survive. It was very strange. He injured them but did not kill them. He only killed senior sister. Perhaps that person simply disdained to kill them. After all, they were just low-level Yuan emperors. In front of a flawless heavenly emperor, they were no different from ants. Senior brother, where do you plan to go next? The people of the Shuo clan were also very upset. The 300 disciples of the Divine Palace had experienced many tragedies. Everyone had feelings for each other. I'm going to the Qilin Dao Mountain in the East Continent to do something for senior brother Eastern Sky. Qin Hao said. You're going alone. Why don't I go with you? Shuo Xiu said worriedly. There were hundreds of countries in the East Continent, and there were many powerhouses. There were no less than dozens of Dharch realm cultivators. Some overlord forces even had many old monsters in the second realm of the Dharch realm. There were even more ordinary Dharch realm cultivators. I'm just going to take care of them, not fight with them. Don't worry, I can do it alone. Qin Hao looked at Guxiu warmly. After all, they were fellow disciples who had gone through life and death together. All right, but now that the Gui race has sealed the sea, you can't leave the East Sea by yourself. I will personally escort you out of the Shuo clan's sea region. Shuo Xiu stood up. Okay. Also, there is one more thing that I need your help with. Qin Hao stood up and read Weiwei's name. Senior brother, your business is my business. If I ask for help, wouldn't the other disciples see me as a joke? Shuo Xiu was extremely loyal. The East Sea was his territory. Even if the sky collapsed, there was nothing he couldn't do. Since junior brother is so enthusiastic, I will be straightforward. You go to the scorching desert stone prison and bring the remaining members of the Mu clan back to the place under the jurisdiction of the Shuo clan. You don't need to take care of them. You just need to give them a small island. My elders have a relationship with the Mu clan. Unfortunately, my ability is limited, so I can only ask for your help. This. Speaking of the Mu clan, Shuo Xiu's face scrunched up. The Mu clan was the mortal enemy of the Gui race. Originally, this was nothing. But in addition to the Gui race, there was an even more terrifying existence that had been suppressing the Mu clan. That was the strongest imperial lord of the East Continent, the Sunset War God. Now, he was known as the strongest person in the East Continent. Chapter 1643. In the vast East Continent, hundreds of countries competed for glory. In the east, there was Penglai, which had 3 immortal mountains surrounded by thousands of islands. There were 2 lands adjacent to the East Sea. In the southeast, there was the Wa people. In the south, there was the #1 empire in the East Continent, Daqin. The Daqin Empire had a vast territory. It was separated from the Penglai Empire by the sea. Its territory was like a gigantic fan. Half of it was by the sea, while the other half was by the Moro Empire. The Moro Empire was in constant conflict with the Great Zhou Empire. The three celestial mountains of Penglai, the Dongyu Empire, the Daqin Empire, the Mara Empire and the Great Zhou Empire could be seen as the eastern boundary of the East Continent. In the middle realm of the East Continent, there were Lei Chuan Judgment Hall, Juying Sword Palace, Gui Huang Country, and so on. Many forces stood across, like a spine separating the two sides. In the western border of the East Continent, Jin Tao Sengoku, Heaven Trampling Sect, and Yuntian Palace were flourishing. In the south, the Vajra Institution, the Water Jade Holy Nation, and the Sacred Sword Wind People were contending with the three realms. Other than that, there were also the Celestial Cliffs, the Phoenix Flower Island, the Ancient Ape Island, and many other powerful islands in the Northland. The eastern border, middle border, western border, southern border, and the Holy Land of the northern border formed the prosperous and dazzling scenery of the five border. In the five border, the strength of any force was not inferior to the three sovereigns and four sects of the southern region, not to mention the number of first-rate and second-rate forces under the empire. This was the five realms of the eastern continent. In the five realms there were dozens of great emperors who had proven their Tao. Among the overlords, there was no lack of great emperors of true self who were at the second level of great emperor Tao. If it was in the southern region, imperial masters could be regarded as qualified to become an overlord force. In the East Continent, only those who had reached the Emperor of True Self realm could be considered the symbol of an overlord force. Usually, in an empire or a powerful sect, there would be a true self ancestor hiding behind the scenes. On the surface, there would be one or two monarch emperors maintaining the operation of the force. In fact, the Sword Sect of the southern region, the Knight Luo Palace, and the Arhat Palace could not be called overlords according to the standards of the East Continent. Only the martial Ning Empire, the North Proud Li family, and the South Proud Xianyuan clan were qualified to be overlords. Of course, if Ning Wu, the Li family of Beio, and the Xianyuan family appeared in the East Continent, they would not be outstanding. From this, one could see how terrifying the martial Tao of the East Continent was. Among the orthodoxies of the four regions, the East Continent had never been doubted or shaken. In this era of the East Continent, the strongest person who could represent the five realms was the Sunset Battle God. After the fall of Dendi, Zhan Wu was the true number one figure in the eyes of all the emperors of the 100 Kingdoms. East Continent's Great Border, Southern Border. Nanjiang City, South River City, an inconspicuous small city under the jurisdiction of a certain overlord power. Presently, it had once again welcomed the grand period of disciple recruitment. The children of countless small clans and commoners from an area of 500 kilometers had eagerly gathered within the city, and numerous pairs of excited and burning gazes looked respectfully at the group of great figures before them. At this moment, Nanjiang City's martial arts plaza could be described as a sea of people. The Void Strike sect, the Taisui Mountain, and the Qilin Dao sect were all gathered here to select qualified people to enter the sect. Today was also a great opportunity for the children of the small clans and commoners to soar into the sky. Of course, the conditions to be selected were harsh, and most people would fail. However, there were still many martial artists who thought that they were among the lucky few who would enter the three great sect with their dreams. At this moment, the martial arts plaza's assessment ceremony was proceeding in an orderly manner. The Void Strike sect, the Taisui Mountain, and the Qilin Dao sect each occupied an area. They had set up many checkpoints, waiting for the qualified disciples to be selected. They would not take the initiative to recruit people at the plaza. Of course, during this process, the upper echelons of the three great sects could not help but glare at each other from afar. If any of them had an outstanding disciple, they would immediately flaunt it to make the other two sects jealous. In addition, behind the upper echelons of the three great sects, there was a giant stage. On the stage, there were several young girls with veils on their faces. Their auras were very outstanding, giving off a sacred and inviolable aura. They silently watched the assessment of the three great sects, but they did not interfere. It was a bit like a supervisor. If any sect had an outstanding disciple, and it happened to be a girl who met their standards, they would not hesitate and would directly enter their camp. At that moment it would be the most eye-catching moment in the plaza, and it would cause a stir in the entire Nanjiang city. After all, the saintesses on the stage were the rulers of the empire, the disciples of the Water Jade Holy Empire's empress. As for Nanjiang city, it was a city under the jurisdiction of the Water Jade Holy Empire. The Qilin Dao sect was under the rule of the Water Jade Holy Empire, and was also under the protection of the Water Jade Empress. Countless young boys and girls had longing gazes, hoping that they would be chosen by the Water Jade Fairies. It was a pity that Nanjiang City had not produced a genius like this for several decades. At this moment, in the Qilin Dao sect's camp, there was a young alchemist wearing plain clothes sitting on the side. He had a head of black hair that draped over his shoulders and a pair of deep eyes that gave off an unfathomable feeling. It was Qin Hao. Calmly looking at the plaza, Qin Hao revealed a faint smile. This scene, he really missed it. He had already been in the Dao sect for 2 years. He had entered the sect as a low-grade alchemist and had become the Dao sect's little alchemist. He had his own private medicine garden. Of course, his status was low. After all, there were still pill venerables above him in the Dao sect, who were elders. However, Qin Hao did not care about his status at all. He had only come to the Dao sect to fulfill the wishes of the Eastern Sky and help his senior apprentice sister look after her. There were no benefits involved, so his status was not important at all. Speaking of which, it was not easy to find the Dao sect. After many twists and turns, it took him a full 9 months. Other than the islands in the north and the Daqin in the east, Qin Hao had traveled through the other 3 realms. Finally, in the Water Jade Holy Empire, he found the origin of his senior apprentice brother's family, the Qilin Dao sect. It had been 2 years since he became a low-level alchemist in Taoism. Along the way, he had experienced several crises and inevitably had disputes with people from other forces. However, the problems were not big. After he crushed the ancestors of countless sects in one fell swoop, all the problems were solved in the best way. "Master, are you really going to recruit another disciple? Humph, you're going to piss me off." At this moment, a woman's voice sounded from the side. Qin Hao lazily looked up and saw a 17 or 18-year-old girl standing in front of him. She had a delicate appearance and was not outstanding at all. However, she was very playful. Her name was Yin Qingqing. She was an outer disciple of the Dao sect. Later, she became Qin Hao's personal alchemist in the medicine garden and learned some small alchemy skills from him. Seeing that master is handsome and has extraordinary alchemy skills, you're afraid of being taken away. Are you jealous? Qin Hao humorously teased, but his mind was not on Yin Qingqing. He didn't know how Shuo Xiu had dealt with it. There shouldn't be any problems. After all, when he left, his words were very serious and full of threats. Only when I'm alive can you be safe. Only then can the Shuo clan continue. The 300 people of the Divine Palace can live in peace. You know in your heart that once something happens to me, the first people Sheng Hua will kill will be you. No one can escape. So, no matter what method you use, I must let the Mu clan leave the stone prison and have a real Pure Land. A naked threat. No matter what pressure he faced, he had to do it. Even if Zhan Wu came in person, he had to take them away safely. In the 5 realms of the East Continent, who didn't know the horror of the Sunset War God? It could be imagined how much pressure the Shuo clan, one of the 3 immortals of Penglai in the East Sea, faced. Shuo Xiu's face was ugly and helpless. However, it was also a solution. If Qin Hao didn't threaten him, Shuo Xiu wouldn't dare to do it. In fact, the problem was not as serious as the two imagined. The Mu clan had declined for 600 years and was no longer as glorious as before. They were no threat to Zhan Wu. After all, Mu Xinzhao was imprisoned by him in the Sunset Peak. Now the Mu clan was just a group of hungry stray dogs, not worth mentioning. The Sky Shaker clan bullied the Mu clan just to find a sense of superiority. If the Shuo clan took them away, the Ji clan wouldn't dare to do anything. The Sunset War God also wouldn't come to the East Sea a second time from the Sunset Peak because it was worthless. After Qin Hao's analysis of Shuo Xiu, the other party calmed down a lot and agreed to do it for him. However, he needed to go back to the clan to discuss it with the ancestor. After all, the ancestor was the backer of the Shuo clan. After Qin Hao bid farewell to Shuo Xiu, he came to the East Continent from the Shuo clan's sea region and embarked on the arduous journey of finding Taoism. After searching for almost a year, he finally became a member of Taoism. Today, the three sects gathered in Nanjiang City to hold a disciple recruitment ceremony. In fact, Qin Hao also had a personal goal. There was a very special disciple that he had to recruit at this time and let Taoism acknowledge his identity in front of the three sects higher up. This person was very important. His name was Sherdong. Qin Hao had investigated and found that he was the descendant of Shirmu. Because too much time had passed, he gradually deviated from the direct line until he was reduced to a destitute orphan and was not recognized by the Shir clan. Therefore, Qin Hao had to give him a reasonable identity and let him return to Taoism. You're not allowed to recruit female disciples. I'm enough. Yin Qingqing put her hands on her waist and shouted at Qin Hao loudly. Her eyes were filled with tears as if she had been wronged. Don't make a fuss. It seems like I bullied you. Master finally became the owner of the herb garden. If you mess things up and kick him out of Taoism, who can I reason with then? Qin Hao glared at Yin Qingqing. This little girl's jealousy was too great. In any case, you're not allowed to recruit female disciples. Yin Qingqing added. Okay. Male. I swear male. Qin Hao raised his hand. Yin Qingqing's tears turned into laughter as she hugged Qin Hao's neck and praised her master repeatedly. She was just short of kissing him. Qin Hao groaned inwardly. This little girl was too bold and unrestrained. Fortunately, Han wasn't around. Ahem. It's the third day of the Lunar New Year. You guys should pay attention to your manners. Otherwise, others might say that Taoism is immoral. On the main seat, a plump old man with a solemn expression muttered to himself. Shi was an Upper Yuan venerate and an elder of Taoism. He was very old-fashioned and paid great attention to the etiquette passed down by his ancestor. He really found it hard to look at the current state of Qin Hao and Yin Qingqing. It was too immoral. Yes, Elder Qi. Qin Hao smiled awkwardly and lectured Yin Qingqing. Why aren't you letting go? Humph. Only then did Yin Qingqing let go of her arms and pouted at Elder Qi. Qingqing, pay attention to your status. You're already an inner sect disciple, so you have to have the demeanor of a big family. Elder Qi lectured her. Oh yes, it's the third day of the Lunar New Year. Haven't you chosen anyone yet? The herb garden is short of manpower. You can just go to Elder Yuji and ask for people from the inner and outer sections. There are thousands of disciples in Taoism. You can just pick anyone. Why do you have to recruit someone from the outside today? It's really troublesome. Yuji was a top elder whose cultivation base was above Elder Shurichi's. He was the top alchemist in Taoism and a high-level Yuan venerate. He was amiable, but he often made mistakes with elixirs. Ever since Qin Hao had joined Taoism and taken charge of the herb garden, things had gotten a lot better, and he had also taken a lot of pressure off Elder Yu. On the other hand, there were often disciples who ate the wrong elixirs and caused their auras to become chaotic. The Taoism's herb garden has been given to you. It seems like you aren't satisfied with the current situation and still want to improve. A cold-looking young man looked at Qin Hao and spoke directly. Today, Nanjiang City had gathered a large number of talents. Qin Hao probably wanted to find someone with outstanding talent and use his disciple's ability to climb to a higher position. What does it have to do with you? Am I wrong to find outstanding talents for Taoism? Qin Hao wouldn't have bothered with this fellow if the higher-ups hadn't been present. Chapter 1644. This person was called Shi Zhenhua. He was a top-tier Yuan monarch and the master of the Dao sect's Sword Valley. He was in charge of imparting sword techniques to his disciples. Because he was talented and belonged to Elder Qi's lineage, he had been arrogant since he was a child. He always thought that his abilities were underestimated, but in reality, he was much more capable than others had imagined. Qin Hao had passed the test as a profound sage alchemist and entered the Dao sect. He was in charge of the herb garden and had not interfered with the Sword Valley. Furthermore, Shi Zhenhua looked down on Qin Hao. There was nothing between the two of them, but for some reason, the more he looked at Qin Hao over the past 2 years, the more he found Qin Hao to be an eyesore. He would often nitpick on Qin Hao and cause trouble for him. Find outstanding talents for the Dao sect? That depends on whether they are qualified or not. Shi Zhenhua said indifferently. What kind of outstanding disciples could a profound sage alchemist teach with his cultivation? After a while, he would break through the Yuan monarch and become a Yuan venerate powerhouse and become a sword venerate powerhouse. The herb garden needs people, not battle talent. Since the sect master and elder, you are relieved to let Chu-san take care of it. Let him make the decision. At the side, a beautiful woman spoke and nodded lightly at Qin Hao. Shi Qing was one of the Dao sect's elders. Not only was she beautiful, but she was also the daughter of the sect master. She was also a descendant of the Eastern Sky. Qin Hao remembered very clearly that the eldest senior brother's surname was Si and his original name was Si Dong. I'm afraid that he will mislead the disciples. He hasn't made any progress. He has been in charge of the herb garden for 2 years and has secretly embezzled a lot of herbs. His cultivation base hasn't improved at all, Shi Zhenhua said gently as he looked at Shi Qing with adoration. You are slandering my master. Yin Qingqing was unhappy when she heard this. Zhenhua, this is a little too much. Another young man in the Dao sect's elders' seats spoke up. Bo Sameo was a lower Yuan venerate who had just broken through not long ago. He was also an elder of the Dao sect and was in charge of teaching the disciples palm technique. Bo Sameo glanced at Qin Hao quietly and shook his head before shutting his mouth. He really didn't want to get involved and make both sides unhappy. Alright, what are you guys arguing about? Do you want the Void Strike sect and Taiswei Mountain to laugh at the Dao sect? Shurichi said sternly. The Shueyao fairies were watching from above. I didn't say anything. Someone has a foul mouth. Qin Hao said with a smile, secretly giving Shi Zhenhua the middle finger. The latter's expression suddenly changed. It's the 3rd day of the Lunar New Year. The faction head and elder, you can rest assured that you'll be in charge of the herb garden. As for the specifics of the selection, you can do as you see fit. Blood ties were one thing, but the sect was another. In the overall situation of the Dao sect, he would never side with anyone. Hearing Shurichi's words, Shi Zhenhua didn't say anything more. After all, the other party was his elder. However, he still warned Qin Hao with a threatening look. The recruitment ceremony in the square continued. Many young men and women lined up and headed towards the 3 sections. In terms of numbers, the martial artists in Nanjiang City were more inclined towards the Strike Air sect and Taiswei Mountain. Therefore, there were many more teams going to the 2 sects than to the Dao sect. This would create a sense of superiority and inferiority. The more people there were, the more candidates there would be for the selection of disciples, and there would be more opportunities to find people with outstanding qualifications. Of course, there was a reason for this phenomenon. The Strike Air sect and Tice Wei Mountain had more masters than the Tao sect, and their martial arts were more aggressive and lethal. Although the Tao sect had a long history and had an extremely glorious period, it was too old now. Many of its martial arts leaned towards defense. The sect emphasized natural Taoism and the invincible benevolence, which was not favored by the contemporary martial artists. In the square of Nanjiang City, the disciple recruitment ceremony was in progress. During this period, the three sects had recruited many qualified disciples and were busy until sunset. The ceremony was about to end, and many young people who were not selected gradually left with disappointment. At this time, among the large number of leaving figures, there was a young man hesitating. He looked in the direction of the Tao sect, hiding a strong expectation. He seemed to have gathered great courage in his heart and finally lifted his foot, but in the next moment, he helplessly fell back. It seemed that he knew that the Tao sect would not choose him. It's the third day of the new year, the square is almost empty, and you haven't chosen one yet? Qi Lao couldn't help but ask. Qin Hao was not in a hurry, but he began to feel anxious. There were so many talents, but it was so difficult to find an alchemy apprentice? He felt that Qin Hao's selection was even stricter than the Tao sect's selection of disciples. There were tens of thousands of disciples in Nanjiang City, but none of them were chosen. The higher the expectations, the greater the disappointment. You always think that the best is at the back, but in the end, you end up empty-handed. Shi Zhenhua said sarcastically, looking behind him with satisfaction. He had picked out a lot of good seedlings. I've chosen. Qin Hao got up and walked towards the square, where the person he was waiting for was. Chosen. Everyone got up at the same time, giving people a sense of passion. It seemed that all the disciples chosen by the Tao sect today were not as strong as the person Qin Hao had chosen. It was obvious that Qin Hao himself was very weak, but he inexplicably affected everyone's mood. It was very strange, but they couldn't find any fault with it. At this moment Qi Lao, Shi Qing, Shi Zhenhua, Bo Sameo, and many higher-ups of the Tao sect, including Yin Qingqing, all looked at the position where Qin Hao was walking to. However, after their eyes fixed, their expressions suddenly changed. Shi Dong. The corner of Shi Zhenhua's mouth twitched slightly. Qin Hao could have chosen anyone, but he chose a bastard who pretended to be from the Shi clan. Do you want to enter the Tao sect? He stepped forward and looked at the young man. In the past 2 years, Qin Hao had secretly looked at him more than once, but now, he was still very serious. You are. The young man raised his head. His face was dirty and his clothes were ragged. He looked at the young man in front of him. He was very tall, but he didn't seem to give people a sense of majesty. He seemed elegant and elegant. Even so, it still brought great pressure to Shi Dong. The owner of the Tao sect's herb garden, I lack a disciple. Are you willing to learn alchemy from me? Qin Hao asked softly. It was as if the young man only needed to nod, and there was no need to test him. Li Chuji, what do you mean by this? Shi Zhenhua strode forward and questioned fiercely without giving Shi Dong a chance to nod. I'm choosing a disciple, Qin Hao said calmly. There are so many people out there, but you chose him. Are you deliberately going against the Shi clan? Shi Zhenhua said angrily. This young man claimed to be from the Shi clan, but the family didn't have any information about him. He was obviously a little liar who wanted to climb up the Shi clan. He didn't know how many years he had knelt at the foot of the Tao mountain. Of course, no matter how long he knelt, the Tao sect would never accept him because the Shi clan didn't recognize him. I'm taking in my own disciple. Don't make a fuss and slander me, Qin Hao said unhappily. Did taking Shi Dong as a disciple mean that he was going against the Shi clan? You know that he's a liar who pretends to be from the Shi clan, but you still brought him into the Dao sect. How do you want the Shi clan to deal with him? Shi Zhenhua scolded. How do you know he's a liar? Qin Hao asked. His name isn't in my genealogy. You don't have his name in your genealogy, so you judge him as a liar and he can't have the surname Shi. What kind of logic is that? Qin Hao took a step forward and stood in front of Shi Zhenhua. He had to bring this person into the Dao sect. He couldn't accept it. The argument between the two immediately attracted a large number of people. Seeing this, Elder Qi took a few steps forward and pointed at Shi Dong. He's in the 3rd year of junior high school. Give me a reason. Why did you choose him? Elder Qi, I'm just taking in a medicine boy. Do I need a reason? Fine. The Shi clan doesn't recognize his identity. Even so, even if he's a stranger, you shouldn't reject him from joining the Dao sect, right? Qin Hao said. That's not what I care about. This child has knelt on the Dao mountain for many years. At the beginning, we also tested him. His spiritual power is only of the 3rd grade. Moreover, even his spiritual root is of the lowest grade. His talent is too mediocre and doesn't meet the standards of the Dao sect. Elder Qi said. He didn't care whether Shi Dong was from the Shi clan or not. He wanted to see his talent and be responsible for the Dao sect. I don't look at the spiritual root when refining pills in my herb garden. Qin Hao said. The so-called spiritual root was the standard to measure the future of a martial artist. The lowest grade of spiritual root indicated that the martial artist could cultivate to the Yuan gathering realm at most in the future. A disciple of the Yuan gathering realm was really too inferior. In the East continent, he was almost the weakest and most useless kind, no different from a commoner. Sir, don't argue for me. I won't join the Dao sect, Shi Dong said timidly. He knew that his talent was mediocre. Just now, the Taisui Mountain and the Air Striking sect had also tested him and eliminated him. Although the place he yearned for the most was still the Dao sect, after all these years, his heart had become cold. He had knelt for too long and needed to leave a trace of dignity for himself. Or rather, to leave a trace of dignity for the ancestors who had passed away. I said that we don't look at the spiritual root when refining pills. Don't worry. Qin Hao comforted him. Mediocre talent? The descendant of senior brother Shi Mu had the blood of the flawless great emperor. How could his talent be mediocre? It was just that Shi Dong had not awakened his power. Otherwise, not to mention Nanjiang City, the whole Water Jade holy country would be shocked and the Dao sect would be proud of him. Even if we don't look at the spiritual root, we still need to look at spiritual power. Don't bully me because I don't know alchemy. Elder Yu is here. Elder Qi said and pointed to the seat behind him. There was an old man dozing off. All the higher-ups of the Dao sect had come, and he was the only one left. He looked particularly outstanding. Oh right. Elder Yu, I'll take Shi Dong into the herb garden. You don't have any objections, right? Qin Hao shouted. The emperors will moved slightly, and a stream of dilly entered the old man's spirit like a sharp thorn. Ah! What, I don't have any objections. Elder Yu had been sleeping soundly when he felt something prick him. He opened his sleepy eyes with great difficulty and looked in their direction. Everyone was speechless and silent. I'm not confused. Actually, I've been listening. The 3rd day of the junior year wants to find a medicine boy. You guys just let him do as he wishes. No matter who he finds, it's enough as long as they can water and weed the herbs. How annoying. After Elder Yu finished speaking, he covered his head with his robe and continued to sleep on the table. Elder Qi took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Elder Yu, the recruitment ceremony is over. We should go. Oh, back to the Dao Mountain. Elder Yu lifted his robe and stretched. He yawned, stood up, and slowly walked over, swaying step by step. Back to the Dao Mountain. Shi Zhenhua roared with anger. Many of the newly recruited disciples trembled at the same time. Then, he strode forward with his hands behind his back. Today, he was not happy. What are you waiting for? Take him back to the Tao Mountain. Elder Qi pointed at Sherdong and said to Qin Hao. Oh, back to the Tao Mountain. Qingqing, take care of your junior brother. Qin Hao smiled and caught up with Elder Qi and Elder Yu. He secretly gave Elder Yu a thumbs up. Elder Yu smiled but didn't say anything. In fact, Qin Hao had already informed him when he accepted Sherdong today. Although he didn't know why he accepted a disciple with poor aptitude, Elder Yu didn't care. What he cared about was Qin Hao. With him around, the pressure on his alchemy would be reduced a lot. Chapter 1645. Qin Hao's cultivation was indeed not high, but he was steady and serious in his work. He strived for perfection in alchemy. Even the number one alchemist in Taoism, Elder Yu, was inferior to him. He supervised the herb garden and didn't need Elder Yu to worry about the outer sect's resources. As for the inner sect disciples' cultivation was generally higher, but there weren't many of them. Moreover, the disciples had their own understanding of cultivation and didn't rely on elixirs. Elder Yu was considering whether to suggest to the sect master that Qin Hao take over as the next chief of the outer sect. However, it was better to wait for a while. After all, Qin Hao had only been in the sect for 2 years and was still inexperienced. As the owner of the herb garden, many people criticized him. If his status rose too quickly, he would be ostracized, such as Shi Zhenhua. The Nanjiang city disciple recruitment ceremony had come to an end, and the 3 sects higher-ups were preparing to return. Before they left, they couldn't help but exchange greetings. Elder Qi, Elder Yu, Taoism has recruited a lot of good seedlings in this year's recruitment. Old man is envious. Behind them, the higher-ups of Tai Sui Mountain and Void Strike sect walked over. An elder from Tai Sui Mountain said casually. He wasn't envious of Taoism because Tai Sui Mountain recruited more disciples. So. Elder Qi and the higher-ups of the 3 sects walked together. Our Tai Sui Mountain also recruited a lot of talented disciples. There are more than 20 of them who have soul power. Many of them have 7th grade spiritual roots and 10th grade spiritual power. The elder from Tai Sui Mountain said proudly. The 3 sects had been competing with each other for many years. Every time they recruited disciples, they would secretly compare. This year was no exception. He secretly noticed that Taoism's disciples were far less than Tai Sui Mountain's. Congratulations! Elder Qi responded indifferently. Was he showing off to Taoism? The elder from Tai Sui Mountain smiled faintly and looked at an outstanding young man from Void Strike sect. Elder Wu, Void Strike sect's disciples are also very outstanding this year. Of course not as many as Tai Sui Mountain, but there are more than 10 disciples who have soul power. Speaking of which, it's lucky that one of them was born with double souls, a 9th grade spiritual root, and 5th grade spiritual power. Lu Guang, this is Tai Sui Mountain's Purple Sun Peak Elder, Ziyang. The Void Strike faction's young elder with outstanding temperament said. As he spoke, a young man stood out from behind him and bowed to the upper echelons of the other 2 sections. I'm Lu Guang, a disciple of the Void Strike sect. Greetings to Senior Ziyang and the other seniors of the Tao sect. After a simple bow, he straightened his body. The 15-year-old boy had not completely lost his childishness, but his face was full of arrogance. What? Exalted Ziyang paused in his steps with a shocked expression on his face. Elder Qi and Elder Yu also trembled slightly as they looked at Lu Guang seriously. Born with 2 innate souls, a 9th grade spirit root, and 15th grade spirit power. Such talent was absolutely rare. In the entire 5 realms of the East continent, he could squeeze into the ranks of first-rate geniuses. The first-rate geniuses of the East continent would be considered top-notch geniuses in the other 3 regions. This young man's future was limitless. At the very least, he could become a Renhuang born with two souls, striking the air faction and picking up a treasure. At this moment, the void striking faction, Taoism's Elder Qi, Elder Yu, Shi Qing, and even Shi Zhenguang revealed looks of envy. Why didn't Taoism discover Lu Guang earlier? However, after the envy, everyone sighed in their hearts. Even if they discovered him earlier, so what? Lu Guang had decided to join the void striking sect. He wouldn't join Taoism and Taisui Mountain. Lu Guang's appearance shocked everyone and also brought some pressure to the two sections. The older generation knew clearly that the future of a sect depended on the younger generation. Whether a disciple was outstanding or not also determined the future of the sect. 100 years later, Lu Guang would probably become a leading figure in Nanjiang City, just like the void striking Tao Emperor of the void striking sect. Born with two souls, a level 9 spiritual root, and a 15th grade spiritual power. He's barely passable. A voice came from the group of Taoism. It wasn't loud, but at this moment, when many elders were shocked by Lu Guang's potential, it was especially abrupt and harsh. Without a doubt, it was Qin Hao who said that. Compared to ordinary people, Lu Guang's potential was indeed too outstanding. In Denda's eyes, it was just SOSO. Qin Hao was the emperor of Daqin in his previous life. His status was comparable to the Sunset War god. If Zhan Wu was here, his evaluation of Lu Guang might be even lower, or even disdainful. However, in the ears of Taisui Mountain and the young elder of the void striking sect, it sounded like contempt. Who is it? Come out. Elder Wu of the void striking sect stared at the group of Taoism. Lu Guang had already become his personal disciple. Now, someone was belittling his disciple in front of him. Shi Zhenhua smiled coldly and secretly looked at Qin Hao. A level 9 spiritual root and a 15th grade spiritual power. He's barely passable? Who gave Qin Hao the courage to say that? Oh, I'm Li Chuji of Taoism, the owner of the herb garden. Qin Hao took 2 steps forward. Profound sage. Elder Wu saw through Qin Hao's cultivation at a glance and suddenly felt funny. He pointed at Lu Guang and said, "You said that Lu Guang's potential is barely passable. A mere mortal sage dares to say that? When Lu Guang grows up, it won't be a problem for him to crush hundreds of Qin Hao. It's a slip of the tongue. Please forgive me." Qin Hao apologized with a smile. In fact, what he said was not wrong, but he had to give face to the void striking sect so as not to embarrass Elder Qi and Elder Yu. "It's okay, Master. It's normal for this senior to be jealous of my outstanding talent. After all, there are people jealous of me every day, and I'm already used to it. Moreover, there's no disciple like me in Taoism." Lu Guang's tone was extremely arrogant, and he didn't even look at Qin Hao. According to his identity, even if Qin Hao was an elder of Taoism, he was just a mediocre person in the eyes of this youth. "Since my disciple is so magnanimous, then forget it. What Lu Guang said is very reasonable. You don't have a good disciple, so you're naturally jealous of others." Elder Wu coldly snorted. A mere profound sage dared to speak without thinking. Fortunately, this person was weak. Otherwise, Elder Wu would definitely ask Qin Hao for advice and teach him how to be a person. However, this person was too weak. If Elder Wu were to suppress him, it would seem like he was bullying the Tao sect. "It's the 3rd day of the Lunar New Year. Let's go back to the herb garden." Elder Yu said. There was no point in arguing. Lu Guang's aptitude was indeed very strong. Not to mention Qin Hao, there was no one in the entire Taoism who could be a match for Lu Guang. "Isn't it embarrassing?" Shi Zhenhua said softly as she passed by Qin Hao. Master, don't be angry. When I become stronger, I'll teach that Lu Guang a lesson." Yin Qingqing waved her little fist, but was ignored by Qin Hao. "I'm sorry." At this time, among the large number of disciples in the group, Shi Dong, who was dressed in tattered clothes, said in self-reproach with his head lowered. Qin Hao had agreed to let him into the herb garden, so he was Shi Dong's master in name. Now that his master was being pointed at in the face, and as a disciple, he was unable to fight for his master's face. Shi Dong felt very guilty and hated his incompetence. Why are you apologizing? It's not your fault. In the future, your achievements will be higher than Lu Guang's. Perhaps he won't even have the right to look up to you. Qin Hao comforted. Immediately, Shi Zhenhua sneered sarcastically. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, the three sects returned to their respective sects. Similarly, the Shui Yao holy maidens on the high platform also left Nanjiang City. In this assessment, among the tens of thousands of people, they did not take a fancy to any of them. This included Lu Guang. It was not that Lu Guang was not qualified. If he was a woman, he could barely enter the Shui Yao holy maidens and become a disciple. However, he would definitely not be outstanding. Unfortunately, Lu Guang was a man, and the Shui Yao Holy Palace did not recruit male disciples. Streams of light rose into the sky, emitting an extremely powerful aura. Countless people looked up at the sky respectfully, watching the Shui Yao Holy Maidens leave. It seemed that this assessment of the disciples of Nanjiang City had disappointed the fairies. However, some people also noticed that this group of fairies was not flying towards the Holy Palace. Instead, they controlled their speed and flew towards a giant peak in the distance of Nanjiang City, as if they had a purpose. South Sky Peak. Elder Wu, the young man who reprimanded Qin Hao, was surprised. The Shui Yao Holy Maidens were heading towards the South Sky Peak. Could it be that that was their target? Not only Elder Wu, but the people of Taisui Mountain and the Dao sects were also surprised. That person on the South Sky Peak was strong enough to attract the attention of the Shui Yao Holy Palace? Could it be that the fairies did not come to Nanjiang City to watch the assessment, but to pay a visit to the South Sky Peak? Many people nodded. That was most likely the case. Although there were 3 sects in Nanjiang City, it was not considered famous in the Shui Yao Holy Nation. How could it be qualified to attract the fairies? It must be the South Sky Peak that attracted them. That was because there was a supreme expert on that mountain peak. I wonder if the fairies will succeed this time. An elder of Taisui mountainside. 2 years ago, a powerful cultivator suddenly came to the South Sky Peak and turned the entire peak into a dojo. No one was allowed to go up there. The South Sky Peak was a famous mountain in this area. Even the 3 sects did not dare to encroach on it. In the beginning, the local cultivators naturally would not let outsiders occupy it. So, many powerful cultivators went up there and fought, but they were all ruthlessly suppressed. Later, the people of Nanjiang City called that powerful cultivator Tribulation Sword Emperor. That person's swordsmanship was unparalleled. Since he came to the South Sky Peak, the entire mountain seemed to have turned into a sword peak. The mountain was overflowing with sword chi, and it was shrouded by the sword catastrophe of the Great Path. Since then, the mountain gave birth to the Way. Because they could not defeat Tribulation Sword Emperor, the cultivators of Nanjiang City, including the 3 sects, later acknowledged his identity. Tribulation Sword Emperor was the owner of the South Sky Peak. In the past 2 years, many powerful cultivators went up there to seek the Way, but they were all stopped by the sword chi on the peak. Taisui Mountain, the Void Strike sect, and the Dao sects all sent high-level cultivators up there to invite Tribulation Sword Emperor. If he was willing to join any of the sects, one could imagine how powerful he would be. But so far, no one could break through the sword chi. I didn't expect Tribulation Sword Emperor to attract the attention of the Shui Yao Holy Palace. The Shui Yao Great sent the saintess here in person. I wonder if the goddesses can break through the sword matrix and see Tribulation Sword Emperor's true face. Shi Zhenhua's eyes were full of yearning. Nowadays, everyone in Nanjiang City knew the name of Tribulation Sword Emperor. He also admired him very much and hoped to see the powerful cultivator. I'm afraid it won't be easy. Elder Yu sighed. Even if the goddesses went out, they probably couldn't break through the sword matrix. So difficult? Shi Zhenhua was surprised. Ha ha. Elder Yu did not respond. Difficult? It was impossible to measure Tribulation Sword Emperor. The leader of the Dao sects and 2 deputy leaders went up the peak together to visit, but they returned without attacking. The leader of Taisui Mountain and the Void Strike Sect Emperor joined forces and were directly injured by the sword chi of the South Sky Peak. They had not recovered yet. Tribulation Sword Emperor's strength had probably reached the limit of the human sovereign realm and was about to become a Sword Emperor. Of course, this was just Elder Yu's guess. An alchemist's spiritual sense was often more sensitive than a martial artist. During this period, Elder Yu's divine soul had been constantly spying on the South Sky Peak, but he only dared to wander around the periphery. He was shocked to find that Tribulation Sword Emperor's sword intent was getting more and more terrifying and unfathomable. Before he came to the South Sky Peak, he might have already been a Sword Emperor. With the strength of his sword Dao, unless the Shueiyao Great Emperor came in person, even the other emperors would not be able to go up the mountain. However, no one knew why Tribulation Sword Emperor came to the South Sky Peak. On the square, everyone looked at the goddesses heading towards the South Sky Peak. Qin Hao was naturally watching as well. He laughed in his heart. Tribulation Sword Emperor? He didn't like this title. After all, he was Dendi. It was a pity that Qian Ning Fairy didn't come today. Otherwise, he could let the saintesses pass through the sword matrix and catch up with Qian Ning. And Qian Ning was the eldest direct disciple of the Shueiyao Great Emperor. Her future identity would be the lord of the Shueiyao Holy Empire. How could she lower herself to come to the small Nanjiang city? Chapter 1646. Everyone returned to the Mountain of the Way. As for why Qin Hao became the sword sovereign and occupied the South Sky Peak, it was because of the ley lines. The ley lines of the South Sky Peak were vast and boundless, like thousands of ancient tree roots spreading out, propping up the entire southern border of the East Continent. The earth chi of the entire southern border rushed to the bottom of the South Sky Peak. That was the center of the land, and it was a rare ley line of 5 spirits. The ley lines of 5 spirits were said to be the heart of the earth. It was extremely precious. Cultivating with the ley lines of 5 spirits would be of great help to warriors. Qin Hao had not reached perfection yet. Absorbing the earth chi to cultivate could greatly shorten the time needed to break through. Of course, he had to make good use of this treasure peak. But he didn't absorb the earth chi of 5 spirits for this purpose. If he only wanted to speed up his cultivation, he could have reached perfection half a year ago and become a great emperor. After all, Qin Hao's cultivation in his previous life was flawless. Although his emperor body was destroyed and his cultivation regressed, his emperor spirit remained at its peak. As he stepped into the emperor realm, his emperor's spirit and physical body merged faster, and his comprehension of the way came naturally. This was also the reason why his improvement was faster than Xiao Han and Shou Wuk. Because there were no obstacles in his breakthrough of rules and way, Muri was once puzzled by this. However, with the unfortunate departure of senior sister, Qin Hao was under great pressure, and it also made him see through a lot. If it was only for speed, so what if he reached perfection in 1 year? He was just following the same path from his previous life, and this path could not bring him new breakthroughs. If he wanted to surpass his previous life and himself, he needed to take a completely different path. He needed to put aside the accumulation of his previous life and return to the orthodoxy of the divine palace. In other words, he needed to constantly temper his emperor will and strengthen his rules, just like when he was cultivating in the divine palace. The ley lines of 5 spirits contained in the ley lines of the South Sky Peak just met the standard. It could temper his way and force out the limits of his potential. Like the divine monk Hui Tong, who had walked the difficult path with a flawless way. In the past 2 years, he had disguised himself as an alchemist and guarded the herb garden. On the other hand, he had occupied the South Sky Peak as the Sword Sovereign and used the Earth Chi of 5 spirits to temper his Emperor Wei. Now, his cultivation had reached the 6th tier of Wei. If it weren't for the fact that my Emperor body is made up of 10,000 spirits and is a half-god, perhaps I would have missed out on this precious land. Qin Hao followed the group back to the Dao Mountain and rejoiced in his heart. The 5 spiritual earth vein was hard to find in the world. Ordinary people could not see through it. At least in his previous life, when he looked down on the East Continent, he did not find the 5 spiritual earth vein on South Sky Peak. Now that he had returned to Dao Mountain, there was a Dharma idol guarding it. The Dao wills of the two were interlinked, and their techniques flowed together. Qin Hao was not worried about the group of Shuiyao fairies. With their cultivation levels, it was impossible for them to break through the Dharma idol's sword formation. Zhenhua, make arrangements for the newly recruited disciples. The 5 realms of the East Continent are really troubled times, Sai. Perhaps he was affected by the tribulation Sword Sovereign, but Elder Qi sighed slightly. In the past 2 years, the great border of the East Continent had become less and less peaceful. Upheavals had occurred frequently. The most shocking thing was one of the holy lands of the Western world, the Divine Wind Palace. A year ago, Shen Qian, the Grand Elder of the Divine Wind Hall and a powerful figure in the East Continent, was killed at West Lake. The water area that stretched for thousands of miles turned into a poisonous swamp in an instant. Not even a blade of grass grew. Humans and animals died upon contact. This matter shocked the 5 realms of the East Continent and made everyone anxious. It had not calmed down until now. No one knew which cultivator had done it. Later, the cultivators of the Divine Wind Hall observed the scene and determined that there was not only one murderer. There were at least 2 or even 3. Moreover, the people who had done it were all very powerful. They were definitely above the cultivation level of a great emperor. They had attacked Emperor Shen Qian together. The traces of the battle at the scene were so tragic that it was shocking. According to rumors, there was a 10,000-mile saber mark that had cut off West Lake. The saber chi had evaporated the lake water. Then, the area within a 1,000-mile radius had turned into a poisonous swamp. This proved that there was a cultivator who was good at saber Dao and medicine involved. Shen Qian might have been poisoned before the battle, but the fatal blow was a spell that blasted the great emperor's body into a sieve. Even his divine soul was annihilated in an instant. According to the analysis of the scene, it was obvious that the saber chi had not pierced through the divine soul and the great emperor's body. The other party's saber had been very powerful, and the saber mark was extremely fierce and domineering. Even though he had killed Shen Qian, a full-strength saber strike was enough to split his body. Perhaps the person who had used the saber was still lacking in cultivation and could not break through Shen Qian's defense. Therefore, with such a fatal spell, the Divine Firmament Hall judged that there were 3 people who were responsible. But they could not find out who it was. After all, there were not many people who had the ability to kill Emperor Shen Qian. There were only a few in the East Continent, and those few people had alibis. After a year, the Divine Firmament Hall still had not found anything. But they believed that the culprit was not in a good state. After all, Emperor Shen Qian was the Grandmaster of the Divine Firmament Hall. His cultivation level had reached the ultimate enlightenment level. Some people even said that he had 1 foot in the unblemished realm. Even if many people worked together to kill him, they would also be injured. If Shen Qian had not been poisoned first, it was hard to say who would have died in the end. Therefore, if the Divine Firmament Hall discovered that any Grandmaster was injured by them, they would definitely be the culprit. Unfortunately, the results of their investigation showed that the Grandmasters of the various great empires were fine. No one was injured. Furthermore, Zhou Wendi, the Grandmaster of the Great Zhou Empire, was a guest at the sword sect of the southern region on the day of Emperor Shen Qian's death. Emperor Mu of the southern region personally testified that he was playing chess with Grandmaster Zhou. This matter was still an unsolved case. There were no clues. But there was a shocking rumor circulating in the East Continent. It was said that the descendant of that person had returned to seek revenge on Shen Qian. The martial artists of the East Continent all knew who that person represented. It was Dendi of the Daqin Empire. Under the Sunset Arrow, the emperor did not exist. Dendi cultivated pills and poisons. His descendant was definitely proficient in this field. Furthermore, Grandmaster Shen Qian's internal organs had been corroded, causing his body to wither. He could not unleash his Tao and was besieged to death. Furthermore, the terrifying blade marks on West Lake were similar to the style of Dendi's generals. All the martial artists of the East Continent spread the rumor that the descendant of that person had returned. At this moment, Qin Hao's lips curled into a cold smile. He naturally knew that Shen Qian was dead. Furthermore, on the night of the incident, he received a message from Guang He immediately. Shen Qian deserved to die. It was not easy to kill Guang He and the others, especially Zhou Wendi. He was severely injured by Shen Qian's counterattack. If not for Holy Emperor Zhang's timely rescue, Zhou Wendi would have been half dead. However, Zhou Wendi was smart. He found an excuse to not be in the East Continent and dragged the sword sect of the South Mountain Range into the water. Otherwise, the great Zhou Empire and the Divine Firmament Hall could not avoid another war. With Zhou Wendi's injuries, he would not have the strength to fight again. Once they fought, even if they won, they would lose half of the great Zhou Empire. It is indeed an eventful period. Elder Yu sighed. Not only the West World, but a murder case also happened in the Penglai continent. Although it was not as shocking as Grandmaster Shen Qian's sudden death, it was still not a small matter to the heaven-shaking tribe. This was because Grandmaster Han Tian's great-great-grandson was killed by a martial artist who passed by. He died without knowing what happened. The Yi tribe did not even know the name and appearance of the murderer. The Penglai continent's sea was sealed because of this. The sea was sealed for more than 2 years, and it was still not lifted. Furthermore, one of the 3 celestial beings of Penglai, the Mu tribe, who was very close to Dendi in the East Continent, was taken into the territory of the Shua tribe. Even though there was a battle with the Yi tribe that day, the Shua tribe's attitude was very strong. They killed one of the Yi tribe's Emperor Yuan on the spot. If it wasn't for the fact that Fang Ye's matter was not resolved, a war would have broken out between the 2 tribes. In the end, the matter was left unsettled. The Yi tribe lost one of their Emperor Yuan's lives, and the Shua tribe successfully took back the old and weak soldiers of the Mu tribe. Many people speculated whether Fang Ye's death was related to the Shua tribe. But without real evidence, the heaven-shaking tribe did not dare to act rashly. Once they did, the consequences would be quite serious. The 2 tribes would fight to the death. Fang Ye was strangely slaughtered, and the Yi tribe lost 2 emperors. They were really unlucky. Of course, the Divine Firmament Hall suffered a greater blow. Their Grandmaster was killed, and they lost their biggest backer. The sect's influence in the West World was declining day by day. It was not hard to imagine that the Divine Firmament Hall would be finished soon if the current Temple Master could not shoulder the great responsibility. After all, in the West World, there were still overlord forces such as Jin Tao Sengoku, Heaven Trampling Sect, Yuntian Palace, and so on. They were always thinking of expanding their sect. Hearing this, Qin Hao smiled again. The Yi tribe, the Divine Firmament Hall, and the Mu tribe, everything was just the beginning. How he was harmed by those people back then, how the Mu tribe declined. In the future, those people would pay the same price one by one. In fact, these were not the only 3 things that happened in the 5 realms of the East Continent. In the land of Penglai, not long after Fang's death, a third-rate force called the Shark Sect was annihilated overnight. All 700 members of the sect were killed without leaving a single corpse. Similarly, the murderer was unknown. But the shark sect was a third-rate force after all. Compared to the sudden deaths of Feng Ye and the Divine Firmament Patriarch, it was insignificant and did not attract much attention. On the contrary, something big seemed to be happening in the southern world. Today, in Nanjiang City, everyone saw the Shuiyao fairies go to the South Sky Peak. That Tribulation Sword Sovereign had attracted the attention of the supreme ruler of the Shuiyao Holy Nation. No one knew what would happen next. Our responsibility is to take care of the Taoist sect and let the foundation of our ancestors continue. As for the major events in the 5 realms, we don't have the heart to care, and we can't care at all. Zhenhua, have you made the arrangements? Elder Qi asked with a sullen face. Grandpa, it's all arranged. This year, we recruited 137 disciples. A total of 8 people have soul power, but none of them have a spiritual power exceeding the 10th grade. Just now, I've already ordered people to prepare the record. The disciples can choose any place to cultivate. Sure, Zhenhua said. Sigh, it's getting worse year by year. Alright, you do as you see fit. Elder Yu and I will go back and report to the sect master. Elder Qi and Elder Yu's bodies bloomed with light as they walked into the inner sect. Compared to the Taisui Mountain and the Void Striking sect, the number of disciples and the advantages and disadvantages were obvious. If it continued to develop, the orthodoxy of the Taoist sect would be in danger. Unfortunately, the sect master and the 2 deputy sect masters came in person, but they couldn't invite the Tribulation Sword Sovereign. If that expert joined the Taoist sect, the strength of the 3 sects would inevitably change. It could even be said that the Tribulation Sword Sovereign alone was enough to support the world. According to his cultivation, the master of the Taisui Mountain and the Void Striking Tao Emperor were no match for him even if they joined forces. Once the Tribulation Sword Sovereign established his own sect, it was completely imaginable how great of a sensation it would cause in Nanjiang City. There would probably be countless disciples seeking the Taoist path, and it would seriously threaten the status of the 3 sections. Because of this, why would he come to the Taoist sect? Hey, your disciple can stay in the herb garden. He doesn't have to come to my Sword Valley to learn. After Elder Qi and Elder Yu left, Shi Zhenhua used the attitude of a superior and indifferently preached to Qin Hao. Shi Dong was accepted by Qin Hao, so he didn't have to come to his Sword Valley. In other words, the Sword Valley didn't welcome Shi Dong. Elder Shi, you're too mean, Yin Qingqing said with dissatisfaction. Since Shi Dong had joined the Taoist sect, he was a disciple of the Taoist sect. Naturally, he was qualified to learn swordsmanship in the Sword Valley. What did Shi Zhenhua mean by not letting him in? You don't have the right to speak. Next to her, a tall and thin young man who was so thin that his cheekbones could be seen spoke with a sharp look on his face. Shi Lang, the personal disciple of Shi Zhenhua, was also the senior brother of the Sword Valley. Chapter 1647. Shi Lang had a sword soul and a 9th grade spiritual power. There was still a gap between him and Lu Guang, who was recruited by the Striking Void sect. However, among the Taoist disciples, he was considered to be one of the best. Moreover, as a junior of the Shi clan, he had a sense of superiority that other disciples did not have. The disciples of the Sword Valley all looked to him as their leader. His cultivation base was at the Mortal Saint realm, and he was Shi Zhenhua's favorite disciple. In the entire Dao sect, there were only a handful of disciples who were more talented than Shi Lang. It could even be said that there was only one person who could overshadow him. At this moment, Shi Lang looked at Yin Qingqing. Saintly might emanated from his body, and a wave of pressure swept out. All the disciples felt their bodies sink. Yin Qingqing's cultivation was not as high as his, so she naturally could not resist. As for Shi Dong, who had just entered the Dao sect, how would he dare to face him? My swordsmanship didn't improve, but I learned the essence of it from Shi Zhenhua. Qin Hao stood in front of Yin Qingqing and released his profound sage-level aura, dispelling Shi Lang's pressure. The disciples immediately felt much better. You! Shi Lang's face was slightly angry. An alchemist dared to lecture him? In another 2 years, his cultivation would catch up to Qin Hao's. The Sword Valley imparted the Tao of the Sword to the Tao sect. Since ancient times they have never stopped their disciples. As the master of the Sword Valley, you have set a precedent. Is this the will of the Tao sect or your own will? Qin Hao asked Shi Zhenhua. If the Tao sect was like this, then there was nothing much to say. Although it is not the will of the Tao sect, I have the authority to decide the matters of the Sword Valley. When Shi Dong comes to the Sword Valley, none of the disciples will have lessons. Shi Zhenhua said. If Shi Dong dared to come, the disciples of the Sword Valley would not be able to learn the sword. Zhenhua, you're overreacting. Bo Sameo said solemnly. Even the rules of the ancestors were to be disobeyed? If the sect master removes me from my position because of this, I will have no complaint. Shi Zhenhua's attitude was very firm, and he went against Shi Dong. Alright, can you act like an elder? Shi Qing was a little angry. The foundation of Taoism was deteriorating year by year. Now that they were in need of people, it was impossible for them to remove Shi Zhenhua from his position as the master of the Sword Valley. After all, the Shi family was a bloodline that Taoism could not afford to lose. Looking at Qin Hao, he said, not only does the Tao sect have the Valley of the Sword, Shi Dong may not necessarily have to learn the sword. Besides refining pills, he can come to the martial pavilion. After saying that, Shi Qing directly walked away. Obviously, the conflict between Qin Hao and Shi Zhenhua had made her very angry. Let Shi Dong come to the martial pavilion to learn palm techniques from me. Bo Sameo patted Qin Hao's shoulder, sighed, and turned to leave. Master, I've troubled you. Shi Dong lowered his head and realized that he had put Qin Hao in a difficult position by becoming a disciple of Taoism. Perhaps he shouldn't have come. There's no trouble between a master and a disciple. It's fine if he doesn't go to the Valley of Swords. In any case, his swordsmanship is poor and he won't be able to learn anything. Qingqing, take your junior brother with you. We're leaving. Qin Hao glanced at Shi Zhenhua before the three of them headed towards the herb garden. That bastard. Shi Zhenhua's face was gloomy, and his mood was extremely bad. Qin Hao had insisted on taking Qin Hao into Taoism. Now, he had even belittled the Sword Valley's swordsmanship in front of him. If it weren't for old Man Yu, he would have taught Qin Hao a lesson today. In particular, Shi Qing's mood had also been ruined by Qin Hao. Master, don't be angry. It's not easy to get rid of Shi Dong. I'll share your burden. Shi Lang looked at Shi Dong's back and said, The martial pavilion? Not only could he not come to the Sword Valley, but he also could not go to the martial pavilion. During the practice, he could make Shi Dong lie in bed for several months with a few casual moves. He did not even need Shi Lang to do it himself. After all, Shi Dong was vulnerable unless he hid in the herb garden and did not come out. Otherwise, he could not go anywhere in Taoism. When Qin Hao and his disciples returned to the herb garden, in the middle realm of the East Continent, there was a huge group of palaces standing in the sky above a bustling city. It was magnificent and full of aura. Sword light rushed into the sky, and figures on swords shuttled back and forth between the palaces. The huge group of buildings was as solemn as the heavenly palace. In the center of the countless palaces, there was an extremely bright divine temple. It was far taller than all the other palaces, like a divine court, and it flowed with astonishing sword will of the great path. This place was the famous Holy Land of the Sword in the East Continent, the Juying Sword Palace. That divine temple was the palace of Juying the Great. It was surrounded by tens of thousands of sword palaces and was worshipped by countless swordsmen in the Middle Realm. In the eyes of the people of the East Continent, he was worthy of being called the Supreme Sword Lord. In the Sword Palace, terrible sword will flowed, silent, invisible, and formless. But when one stepped into it, it made one feel as if they were in a sea of swords, surviving in the waves of swords. Their spiritual souls were suppressed by the sword will at all times. At this time, in one place of the Sword Palace, there were hundreds of millions of divine swords hanging upside down, spewing out destructive light. Tens of thousands of swords flashed and clanged. Waves of sword will of the great path gathered below, and below was a huge sword pool. This was the place where the sword will of the Sword Palace was the most turbulent. There were hundreds of millions of divine swords above, all of which were the famous swords of the great ancestors of the Sword Palace. Only the personal disciples of the current Juying Sword Lord were qualified to enter the sword pool and be tempered by the sword will of the past great ancestors. But now there was someone from the outside world here. In the huge sword pool, a young man sat cross-legged. His shirtless body was covered with wounds. Looking at the wounds, it seemed that his flesh had been torn apart by the terrible might of thunder. There were streaks of lightning flashing between his flesh. The lightning and sword will intertwined. Above, hundreds of millions of divine swords were humming together. The terrible might of the sword pressed down, constantly removing the remaining might of thunder in the young man's body. This young man was Showuk, the heir of the Sword Emperor of the southern region. Beside the sword pool, Feng Qianli looked on with a cold expression. His eyes were full of confusion and a trace of jealousy. He had never thought that one day, Showuk would be able to enter the sword pool of the Sword Palace and be baptized by the most sacred sword will of the past great ancestors. Only he and a few of his junior brothers were worthy of such glory. Showuk was not a disciple of the Sword Palace. What did he do to deserve it? Are you confused? A voice sounded in the solemn palace. It was calm and natural, but it was full of supreme divine might. I don't understand. Why did you save him? Feng Qianli asked. When Showuk came to Sword Palace, he was severely injured and on the verge of death. His sword heart, sword vein, sword body, and even his divine soul and sword will had suffered immeasurable damage. When his master went out, he brought him back to Sword Palace. At that time, Feng Qianli was shocked. Firstly, he was surprised that Showuk appeared in the East Continent. Secondly, who hurt him so badly? Later, he learned that his master rescued him from the East Sea. Then, a series of accidents happened in Penglai, and Feng Ye was killed. This made Feng Qianli extremely vigilant. Moreover, the strong cultivator of the Ji tribe came to the Sword Palace in person and brought a portrait to the Juying Sword Emperor to verify whether it was a disciple of the Sword Palace. The face of the person in the portrait was Qin Hao. At that time, Feng Qianli's heart almost jumped out of his chest. What surprised him was that when the strong cultivator of the Ji tribe asked, his master actually admitted that the person in the portrait was a disciple of his Sword Palace, who was ordered to travel, and also concealed the fact that Showuk was seriously injured. The Ji tribe did not know that the Sword Palace had taken in Showuk, and the Juying Sword Emperor admitted that the person in the portrait was his disciple. The strong cultivators of the Ji tribe who visited the Sword Palace could only leave in disappointment. Obviously, the answer given by the Juying Sword Emperor was not the result they expected. It was just that Feng Qianli did not understand why his master would do this and take such a great risk. If the matter was exposed, it would inevitably set up a strong enemy for the Sword Palace. Sword Dao has no boundaries. Meeting is fate. Everything has a cause and effect. The voice of the Juying Sword Emperor sounded in the palace. So, has Master ever thought of causing the dissatisfaction of the Ji tribe? Feng Qianli asked. What do you think of the Ji tribe about the Mu tribe? Without giving Feng Qianli an answer, the Juying Sword Emperor asked the other party. Feng Qianli was startled and silent. He naturally knew the historical events of the East Continent. Old Emperor Mu was defeated by the Sunset War God and imprisoned in the Sunset Divine Peak. The Mu tribe lost their backer and was tragically robbed by the Sky Shaker. To be fair, the Ji tribe was undoubtedly a robber, not a gentleman's conduct. But from another perspective, the Ji tribe took advantage of the Mu tribe's weakness and kicked them off the overlord force in one fell swoop. In the Penglai territory, the status of the Sky Shaker tribe was guaranteed and its influence expanded. Ancestor Han Tian's actions were very wise. If it were Feng Qianli, he would do the same. After all, it was for the future of the family. Do you think the Ji tribe is right? The Jueying Sword Emperor said, if the Mu tribe was in the Sword Palace, one day, I would die in the hands of the Sunset War God, and the Ji tribe wanted to seize the Sword Palace, what would you do? Disciple and the Ji tribe are irreconcilable. Feng Qianli's answer was very straightforward. But there will never be a day when the Sword Palace is no match for the Daqin. The Jueying Sword Emperor laughed, and his laughter echoed in the palace. There won't be a day, who can guarantee? The East Continent was no longer as harmonious as it was when Denda suppressed it. Now the Daqin was even more ambitious, but it still lacked the capital to unify the East Continent. If it really had the capital, the Sword Palace would no longer exist. Qianli, all the martial artists in the Middle World know that you can cut 3,000 miles with one sword. The disciples of the Sword Palace regard you as their leader and worship you, but in my opinion, your sword is still too short. What was a sword? If today, it was not him who saved Showuk, but the Southern Region Sword Emperor who saved Feng Qianli, then would Feng Qianli hope that the Sword Emperor would hand him over? The sword had no boundary, and the Tao had no boundary. Sword cultivators were just a speck of dust among the masses. Even as dust, who would be willing to be mud and be stepped on by others. Dust also longed to move forward with the storm. Showuk's sword should not end here. The divine wilderness needed such a sword. The vast Taoist mountains stretched endlessly. There were many dojos in the mountains, such as herb gardens, sword valleys, spiritual pagodas, martial pavilions, and so on. It was extremely huge. Even if it was getting worse with each generation, its ancestral heritage was not something the striking Void sect and Taisui Mountain could compare with. There were thousands of disciples in the Taoist sect. They were divided into the outer sect and the inner sect. Those below the Saint Realm were the outer sect, and those above were the inner sect. There were many outer sect disciples, and they were taught by elders who guarded a dojo. For example, Shi Zhenhua of the Sword Valley, Shangqing of the Spiritual Pagoda, and Bo Sameo of the Martial Pavilion. The outer sect disciples could go to any dojo to cultivate, but each elder also had a direct disciple. As for the inner sect, there were higher-ups in charge of preaching. The sect master was Shangqing's father. The two deputy sect masters were the clan master of the Shi clan and the clan master of the Bo clan. The three sect masters were all strong Renhuang. Of course, when the Taoist sect was founded, there were more aristocratic families than just the three clans. Now, the Taoist sect was no longer as glorious as before. Many aristocratic families had withdrawn from the Taoist sect, leaving only the three most important clans to guard their ancestral heritage. In Qin Hao's opinion, the Taoist sect was now between the first-rate and third-rate forces. At best, it could be regarded as a second-rate force, but compared to the real second-rate forces, it was actually much weaker. For example, Taisui Mountain and the Striking Void sect had higher cultivation and the quality of their disciples than the Taoist sect. Once they fought, they were no match for the two sections. This was the current situation of the Taoist sect. The inner sect was maintained by the three clan masters, Si, Shi, and Bo. The outer sect dojos were taught by low-level elders. "Master, what are you looking at?" In the herb garden, Yin Qingqing put down the bucket and squatted beside Qin Hao. 2 years had passed, and the girl's figure had become more and more plump, exuding a charm. Qin Hao did not reply. His deep eyes pierced through the sky and landed on the main peak of the Taoist sect. This main peak looked old, but it gave off a strange feeling. It was like a giant peak that was alive. Moreover, it contained a shocking power. Qin Hao did not know if others felt this way, but he had the all-spirits body and was extremely sensitive to spiritual qi. It could be said that Qin Hao's physical body was the condensation of the essence of spiritual qi. His eyes could see through the essence that many people could not. Only the main peak of the Taoist sect could not be seen through. It was like the moon in the water. The more he looked at it, the more illusory it became. It was as if it was close but also far away. Chapter 1648. The Taoist peak hid the Taoist way and was protected by the supreme Taoist will. Therefore, he could not see through it. Qingqing, tell me more about the legend of the Taoist ancestor. Qin Hao said. He pushed away the wet soil with both hands, threw the medicinal herb seeds down, and carefully sealed the soil. I've told you many times. Qingqing refused. I want to hear more. Qin Hao looked at her with a smile. I'm impressed. Well, you're my only master. I'll reluctantly tell you one more time. Qingqing pretended to be mature. She put her hands behind her back and walked back and forth in front of Qin Hao, telling the story of the Taoist sect again. Once upon a time, the Taoist sect was glorious. It stood in the southern world, and its reputation spread across the East continent. That was the most glorious era of the Taoist sect. Qingqing didn't know how glorious it was. It should be about the same as the current Daqin Empire. At that time, there was no water in the southern world, no Jade Holy Country, no Vajra Academy, and no sword and wind people. Only the Taoist sect enjoyed the glory. Cough, cough. You don't have to talk about the Taoist sect. Qin Hao gestured for her to get to the point. Without the Taoist sect, there is no Taoist ancestor. You think I'm long-winded? I'm not going to tell you. Qingqing threw a tantrum. Okay. Tell me. Qin Hao obediently shut up. Don't interrupt me. Qingqing waved her fist and threatened. My cultivation is about to catch up with yours. Are you going to betray me? Qin Hao pretended to be vigilant and afraid. Don't interrupt. Okay. I won't interrupt. Just tell me. Humph. Qingqing snorted and scratched her head. Where was I just now? Oh, by the way, the Taoist sect was brilliant and dominated the world. The disciples of that era were all peerless talents. During the heyday of the Taoist sect, there were many members of the aristocratic families. Within each clan there were countless geniuses. There were only 3 people who were the most outstanding. The Ji clan, the Shi clan, and the Bo clan each had one. They suppressed the heroes of the southern world. The 3 geniuses were born in the same year and grew up together. They were very close to each other. They swore to strengthen the sect and create the strongest sect in the East continent. Qingqing's words evoked the memories buried deep in Qin Hao's heart. In his mind, the faces of senior brother Eastern Sky and Shirmu appeared clearly. The legend of the Tao ancestor was related to his 2 senior brothers. However, the Tao ancestor himself was not the 2 of them. He was the last of the 3 peerless geniuses. Feng Dong, Shirmu, and Bo Changji were born during the golden age of the Tao Gate. Moreover, they were geniuses among geniuses during that era. No one in the southern world could compare to them. One could imagine how outstanding his talent was. Later, there was a sign from the Divine Palace and the birth of the Divine Sword emblem. Haotian Taoism sent geniuses to respond to the sign. Shi Dong and Shirmu were the representatives of Haotian Taoism. They crushed their opponents along the way and went to the South Pole Holy Land. Bo Changji naturally wanted to go as well. He even sneaked away and wanted to participate with Eastern Sky and Shirmu. However, he was caught by the elders of the Tao Gate. After all, the Tao Gate could not be without its inheritance. The departure of Eastern Sky and Shirmu had already hurt the elders of the Tao Gate. How could they let the three of them go? Bo Changji was left behind. From then on, there was no smile on his face. In the past, when it came to martial arts, only Eastern Sky and Shirmu could compete with him. After the two of them left, it was as if they had taken Bo Changji's soul with them. He eventually turned from a reckless young man into an old-fashioned and serious old man. The Tao Ancestor was the respectful title that the later generations of the Tao Gate called Bo Changji. Although he lost the opportunity to enter the Divine Palace, his talent was still unshakable. Especially after Eastern Sky and Shirmu left, the strength of his martial arts was reflected to the extreme. No one in the current generation of the southern world could withstand a blow from Bo Changji. They were all crushed. From then on, Bo Changji, the Tao Ancestor, became the symbol of the Tao Gate. He was known as the invincible god of the southern world. However, he was not happy. He was born ignorant and ended up depressed. He died young. At the moment before his death, his eyes were fixed in the direction of the South Pole, as if he saw the return of the people he had been looking forward to. Heaven is jealous of talents. It's a pity that I was not born in the era of the Tao Ancestor. Otherwise, the Tao Gate would have 4 geniuses guarding it. The great ancestor would not have died alone. It's really a pity. Speaking of this, Yin Qingqing raised her hand and wiped her tears. She cried as if she wished she could travel through time and space. According to Bo Changji's last wish, I buried his body at the bottom of the main peak. Although the Tao Ancestor was dead, his soul guarded the Tao Gate. His soul turned into the peak of the Tao Gate, forever protecting the Tao Gate. As long as the peak existed, so did his soul. He would wait until the day he reunited with his old friend. Phew! Qin Hao let out a long breath. Although he had heard of it many times, every time Yin Qingqing talked about it, his heart would surge with heroism and wave. This was really a respectable and sad story. Of the 3 geniuses of the Tao Gate, 2 left and 1 stayed. Those who left did not return, and those who stayed died early. What are you sighing for? Actually, no matter if the story is true or false, along with the passage of time, many Tao temples in the Tao sect have gradually become dilapidated. Only that main peak is still young and glowing with vitality. It's sufficiently miraculous. Moreover, the Tao Gate has existed for thousands of years. During this period, it has encountered many great crises. Every time a major change occurs, a strange sound will come from the main peak to intimidate the enemy and make the invaders not dare to overstep their boundaries. I don't know if the Tao Ancestor is still alive, or if his obsession has not dissipated, protecting the Tao Gate until today. Yin Qingqing also looked at the peak. She was like an immortal pine tree, and her heart was filled with respect. As a child born and raised in the southern land of the East Continent, Yin Qingqing's family had lived at the foot of the mountain for generations. Naturally, she grew up listening to the stories of the Tao Gate. The legend of the Tao Ancestor was what she yearned for the most. However, as a matter of fact, if the ancestral spirit of the Tao Peak had not dissipated, the sect would not have declined to such a state. It was an overlord force of an era, but it was surpassed by the later generations. It was fine that it could not compare to the Water Jade Emperor, the Vajra Academy, and the Sacred Sword Wind people. Now, even the people of the Air Strike sect and the Taisui Mountain dared to point at the Tao Gate and speak loudly. The spirit of the Tao Ancestor would have been blown away by the wind. The story is over. Let's go back and cook. Yin Qingqing picked up the bucket and was about to go to the kitchen in the herb garden. Qin Hao sat quietly where he was, still thinking about the legend of the Tao Ancestor. He looked at the main peak again, and his pupils gradually turned into the luster of flames. An invisible emperor's will shrouded down, but it could not reach the main peak. It was as if it was blocked in midair by some kind of force. So powerful. Qin Hao's brows furrowed slightly. It had been more than 2 years since he entered the Tao Gate, and he had lived here for almost 4 years. Every day, he refined his emperor's will in the 5 spirits earthly chi of the South Sky Peak. He did not dare to slack off. Now, his cultivation had reached the 7th tier of the Tao realm, and he was a genuine unblemished emperor according to his senior sister. If he fought with Hui Tong again, Qin Hao did not need to use the power of the dragon. He could defeat Hui Tong with his fists alone. Even if he encountered a Tao emperor now, he could not say for sure that he would win, but he would definitely not lose. But his emperor's will could not even touch a single peak, let alone see through it. As Qingqing said, the spirit of the Tao ancestor had really been blown away by the wind. Or rather, the Tao ancestor was not dead. Qin Hao did not know whether the Tao peak was protected by the ancestral spirit, and whether the Tao ancestor was really dead or not. However, he knew one thing, and that was that the peak was alive. It was like a living person, and it contained an incomparably terrifying power. This power had always been hidden in the peak. It just did not erupt. Qin Hao found it hard to imagine. His cultivation was comparable to that of a Tao emperor, but he could not even peek into the Tao peak. Once that power erupted, what a shocking scene it would be. Perhaps the true self-great emperor, who was at the 2nd tier of the Tao realm, would be like a child drinking milk in front of the Tao peak. After cooking, Qin Hao asked Qingqing to go to the martial pavilion. Sherdong had cultivated in the martial pavilion for a few days, and Qin Hao needed to test his cultivation. Sherdong was different from the other disciples of the Tao Gate. As Qin Hao had guessed, his bloodline had not awakened. However, it was not easy to awaken Sherdong's bloodline. Even though Qin Hao's alchemy skills were extraordinary, he did not dare to be careless. He was afraid that an external awakening would damage the power of Sherdong's bloodline. An external awakening would definitely not be as effective as one's own awakening. Therefore, there could not be any mistakes in cultivation. After all, this child was Shi Mu's direct descendant and shouldered the mission of the Tao Gate's prosperity. The elder guarding the martial pavilion was Bo Sameo. He was proficient in the Tao Gate's martial arts techniques and was good at close combat. In particular, his ancestral technique, the yin-yang dual polarity palm, was extremely fierce and domineering. It could be said to be the most complete and lethal technique in the Tao Gate. Today, Bo Sameo would teach the martial pavilion's disciples the secrets of the yin-yang dual polarity palm. Absorb the spiritual qi of heaven and earth, gather yin and yang, reach the 9 meridians, and connect to the qi sea. Yang is real, yin is illusory, and yin is illusory. Yin and yang are unpredictable. When the palm strikes, it can shatter mountains, break the martial body, and kill the enemy in one blow. In the training hall, Bo Sameo explained the essentials with an extremely serious attitude. Even though many of the disciples present today were not from the martial pavilion, no matter which sect they were from, they were still disciples of the Tao Gate. He would not be biased. On this point, he was similar to Elder Qi. Now that you are gradually getting used to the yin-yang dual polarity qi flowing through your meridians at the same time, many of you can bear it. Remember, with the 9 meridians, the power of the yin-yang dual polarity qi will increase exponentially. It is not a dream to kill enemies of a higher level. Find an opponent to practice with, and don't go too far. Bo Sameo instructed. His duty was to teach the techniques, but the specific cultivation of the disciples depended on them. Bo Sameo left the training hall to the disciples and returned to the platform. He brewed tea to moisten his throat. For a moment, the quiet disciples in the training hall stood up and began to find opponents. Martial arts techniques needed to be practiced. Today, they were practicing with their fellow disciples. Perhaps tomorrow they would use it on their enemies. Many disciples found suitable opponent. The yin-yang dual polarity qi gathered, and the Tao light flickered around them. At this moment, a young man was sitting in place but did not move. It was Sherdong. Although he did not find someone to practice with, the yin-yang Dao light flickered around Sherdong's body. He closed his eyes and cultivated, his hair flying. Obviously, he did not slack off. Junior brother Sherdong is very hard-working. Why don't you find someone to test you? At this moment, a person walked over. It was Shi Lang of the Sword Valley, followed by a large number of disciples of the Sword Valley. He was quite popular. Sherdong did not reply. It was not that he was afraid of the other party. He had entered the Dao sect for 2 years and learned alchemy from Qin Hao for 2 years. His temperament and cultivation had changed greatly. He was naturally not the same as when he first entered. Moreover, Qin Hao had warned him that without his permission, he was not allowed to spar with any disciples of the Dao sect. He would naturally obey his master's words. "Hey, senior brother Shi Lang is asking you a question. Are you mute?" A disciple of the Sword Valley said unhappily. Sherdong still did not say a word. He did not even open his eyes. "Hey, you really think you're a big shot?" The disciple of the Sword Valley rolled up his sleeves, wanting to teach Sherdong a lesson. "Don't be rough with Great Master Qin's disciple. What if you hurt him?" Shi Lang stopped him. Of course, it was fake. In his heart, he wanted to beat Sherdong up. He had waited for 2 years. Unfortunately, during these 2 years, Sherdong had been hiding in the herb garden and did not take half a step out. It was only in the past few days that he began to walk around other training halls. Today, he was caught red-handed by Shi Lang. "Junior brother Sherdong, you're quite serious. However, cultivation alone is not enough. You have to practice it. You have to hit someone. Only then will they know how painful it is. Why don't we exchange a few moves?" Shi Lang squatted down and stared at Sherdong's face with a smile. He really wanted to kick Sherdong's face a few times. Chapter 1649. The two of them were so close that Sherdong could even feel the other's breath on his face. He slowly opened his eyes and said, "I'm not your opponent." It wasn't that he was afraid of fighting, but the truth. Shi Lang was the leader of the Sword Valley, and there was almost no one in the Taoist sect who could defeat him. Even if there was, it was definitely not Sherdong, at least not now. After all, he had just entered the Taoist sect for 2 years. "Oh, so that's what you're worried about. Don't be nervous, I will suppress my cultivation and try not to hurt you. Or I can spar with others." Shi Lang smiled and gave a look to a disciple of the Sword Valley. The disciple took a heavy step forward and rubbed his fist excitedly. "Come on, junior brother Sherdong, let me take a few more of your palms. I'm willing to use my flesh and blood to help you hone your martial arts skills." At this moment, all the disciples of the Sword Valley were excited and couldn't wait to see Sherdong make a fool of himself. Sherdong glanced at the disciple and said, "I don't want to spar with you. Senior brother, find someone else." "Ah, don't say that. I'm willing. Hit me as much as you want. Don't be soft-hearted," the disciple said. Sherdong breathed a sigh of relief and looked at him. He advised, "But you're not my opponent. It's better not to fight lest you become a joke." The disciple was stunned. He was not Sherdong's opponent? Was he looking down on him? Was he being looked down on? "You must have gone crazy from refining medicine in the herb garden, spitting out such delirious words. I just complimented you a little, and you actually took advantage of my face. Then don't blame me for being merciless." The disciple of the Sword Valley was furious. He couldn't tolerate being looked down on by the useless disciple of the useless Great Master Qin. If he didn't make a move today, he would be laughed at by the other disciples of the Sword Valley. He was about to release his cultivation to scare Sherdong. Suddenly, a beam of orange flame rose from in front of him, and the air waves spread out violently, forcing the disciples of the Sword Valley to retreat repeatedly. At this time, a saint's aura swept out and suppressed the training hall. The disciple of the Sword Valley who was speaking loudly was shocked to find that Sherdong's body was bathed in orange flame, and his hair was dancing like a saint. Saint realm. Suddenly, the training hall was in an uproar. The holy aura that permeated the air swept across the entire place like a gust of wind. Looking at Sherdong who was bathed in orange flames, all the disciples trembled with fear. Pooh! The tea in Bo Sameo's mouth splashed 3 feet away. He was dumbfounded, and the shock in his heart was no less than the disciples in the training hall. Saint realm! It had been more than 2 years since Sherdong entered the Taoist sect. Thinking back, Sherdong was only a young brat in the early stage of the gathering element realm. Unknowingly, he had actually stepped into the saint plane of the martial art. How shocking was that? At this moment, Sherdong was the absolute focus of the training ground. Countless pairs of eyes were fixed on him. Judging from his aura, he was only a lower mortal saint. Perhaps he had just broken through not long ago. After all, the orange light he emitted was very thin. But a saint was a saint after all, and the might of a saint was not fake. How is this possible? The disciple of the Sword Valley who was shouting loudly and mercilessly was dumbfounded. His legs were trembling uncontrollably, and his heart was in turmoil. The scene before his eyes was simply unbelievable. Almost everyone in the Taoist sect knew that Sherdong had a first-grade spirit root and a third-grade spiritual power. With the lowest aptitude in martial arts, he was destined not to achieve much in his life. Even if he grew up, he would only be a little stronger than ordinary people. He could be said to be the weakest martial artist in the East continent. Who would have dared to imagine that he could become a saint? Of course, the aptitude test by the sect was only a rough estimate. In reality, there would be some fluctuations because everyone had potential. But in any case, there were examples of people with first-grade spirit roots who had cultivated to the master origin level. It was impossible for them to surpass the ancestor origin level, let alone transcend mortality and become a saint. But Sherdong had really become a saint. It was a living miracle. What the hell? Their legs trembled more and more. After the shock, fear swept through their bodies. The disciples who were fighting with Sherdong immediately cowered in the face of the holy aura. How could they fight? He was only in the 8th stage of the ancestor origin level. There were 3 natural barriers in martial arts. The saint plane was the first. It was a huge divide. Outside the saint plane, one was mortal. Once one entered the saint plane, one shed their mortal body and comprehended the true essence of martial arts. The human sovereign realm was the second, and the martial emperor realm was the third. However, these 2 barriers were too far away from the disciples of the Taoist sect. They might not be able to reach them in their lifetime. However, at this moment, the disciple of the Valley of Swords knew very well that he was no match for Sherdong. A saint was a saint after all. Unless one was extremely talented, like Lu Guang of the Striking Sky sect, who was born with 2 souls and a 5th-grade spiritual power, they would have the ability to challenge those of a higher level. Unfortunately, this disciple could not compare to Lu Guang. Moreover, Lu Guang's cultivation was only at the level of. He would definitely be stronger than Sherdong. Lu Guang might even surpass Shirlang. After all, a 5th-grade spiritual power cultivation speed was extremely terrifying. The martial pavilion was silent. At this moment, everyone was shocked by the shock brought by Sherdong. Shirlang of the Valley of Swords was naturally equally shocked. He could not understand how Sherdong, who had a first-grade spirit root, could become a saint. What kind of monster was the great Master Qin in the herb garden? How did he train Sherdong? Haha, the herb garden is an important place in the sect. It controls the resources of the sect. Great Master Qin is not the owner of the herb garden for nothing. Taking a deep breath, Shirlang suppressed his emotions. Soon, he figured it out. How many expensive tonics did Qin Hao feed his disciple, and how many resources did he steal from the sect to make Sherdong like this? Since that was the case, Shi Lang did not need to hide anymore. A battle between saints should be possible, he said. Let me see what junior brother Sherdong is capable of. After saying that, he took 2 steps back. The primordial qi around Shi Lang surged, and an orange light bloomed. The saint path pressure that filled his body instantly surpassed Sherdong's. It was the profound saint realm. He was also improving. I said, I don't want to fight, Sherdong said. He showed his cultivation level only to let the disciples of the Valley of Swords know the difficulty and retreat. The most important reason was that Qin Hao did not allow him to fight with others. What are you afraid of? That Qin Gai used the resources of the sect to feed you until you were fat and strong. Wasn't it all for this day? He has achieved his goal. Shi Lang sneered. Don't slander my master. Sherdong's face tightened, and a trace of anger flashed in his eyes. Sherdong has just entered the mortal saint realm. It's a bit unfair for you to fight with him. At this time, a disciple of the martial pavilion spoke up and took 2 steps forward. He had thick eyebrows and big eyes, and his face was upright. Bo Minghua was Bo Simeo's disciple and the eldest senior brother of the martial pavilion. What does it have to do with you? Shi Lang looked at Bo Minghua. The other party was also a profound saint, but Shi Lang really did not care about him. Please enlighten me. Bo Minghua raised his hand and gathered yin and yang. Light flashed around his body, and his saint force raged. He did not want to be the first, but he could not bear to see Shi Lang so arrogant. Ha, you asked for it. Shi Lang looked slightly at the platform and saw that Bo Simeo, the elder of the martial pavilion, was drinking tea. It was naturally not good for the elders to intervene in a competition between disciples. Thinking of this, Shi Lang fiercely blasted a palm toward Bo Minghua. Saint force gushed out, and the Tao turned into yin and yang. In a competition between the martial pavilion, it was natural to use the martial techniques of the martial pavilion. Bo Minghua saw the yin and yang palm light blasting toward him. It was fierce and overbearing, and he did not dare to be careless. After all, his cultivation was lower than Shi Lang's by 2 stages, but in terms of yin and yang dual polarity palms, Bo Minghua, who was from the Bo family, was not necessarily inferior. The profound saint force connected the 8 meridians of the martial path. The yin and yang qi between Bo Minghua's palms became more and more abundant, dazzling, and a majestic momentum was formed. His palms were like thunder, and the palm light flew out and collided with Shi Lang's palm print. There was an explosion in the platform, and Shi Lang's palm light suddenly collapsed. Good palm technique. Sherdong praised. Senior brother Bo Minghua's yin and yang qi was obviously better than Shi Lang's. Destroy. Shi Lang's face was unhappy, and he sent out another palm to disperse Bo Minghua's palm qi. However, the latter's moves were like a gust of wind, and his continuous attacks did not stop. In Bo Minghua's view, it was a rare opportunity to fight with Shi Lang. After all, among the disciples of the martial pavilion, there were few who could be on par with him, and he should take this opportunity to hone his dual polarity palms. Bo Minghua did not stop, but Shi Lang gradually felt that he could not bear it. After a few more palms, he had already retreated several feet. In terms of palm techniques, he did not have the upper hand. After all, this was the martial technique that the disciples of the Bo family were good at. Buzz. The radiance of the great Tao of yin and yang appeared behind Bo Minghua. His understanding of the yin and yang dual polarity palms was far beyond the knowledge of the disciples of the Tao sect. He was very clear on how to use it skillfully, and how to make the palm power stronger. At this moment, this palm was his deepest understanding of palm techniques, and it was a good opportunity to verify it with Shi Lang. Even if he was defeated, he could perfect his palm technique from the failure. Shi Lang retreated several feet, and a lot of sweat flowed down his cheek. Bo Minghua's imposing manner brought him a faint pressure, and at this moment, the other party was obviously going all out. If he used palm techniques to deal with it, he was likely to lose. This was a result that Shi Lang could not accept, because he was the senior brother of the Sword Valley. Sword of the Way. Shi Lang stepped on the ground and the dojo shook. A sword will suddenly burst out, and it was incomparably sharp. Immediately, a sword mark appeared behind him, and its folds shone brightly. He chanted the sword mantra of the Shi clan, and the sword mark shone brightly, and the sound of the sword shook the void. When Bo Minghua's last palm came crashing down, Shi Lang held the glorious sword in his hand and infused it with saint power. The sword slashed down and split the yin and yang palm light. Suddenly, sword chi raged, and countless sword chi flashed out and fell on Bo Minghua's body. Poof! Bo Minghua spat out a mouthful of vermilion blood, and he staggered back. Countless sword holes appeared on his clothes, and his upper body was stained with blood. He had lost. Shi Lang, you have an unfair advantage. The disciples of the martial pavilion shouted. Today, Elder Bo had taught him palm techniques, but Shi Lang had used the sword techniques of the Sword Valley to fight. What was the reason for this? What are you all arguing about? Even Elder Bo has no objection, so why are you all talking so much? Shi Lang smiled disapprovingly and glanced at Bo Minghua. Your palm technique is not bad, but unfortunately, it can't compare to the sword of the Sword Valley. After that, he held the sword mark in his hand and walked toward Shi Dong step by step. The sword mark spewed out the light of the profound saint. Come, junior brother Shi Dong, let me have a taste of your skills. Let me see if the resources that Qin Hao wasted on you are of value. Without waiting for Shi Dong to respond, Shi Lang's sword light directly slashed down, and sword chi of more than 10 feet fell on Shi Dong's head. At this moment, the stone floor where Shi Dong was sitting cracked inch by inch, and the sword chi sank half a foot deep. Obviously, this was not a sparring session, but he wanted to leave something on Shi Dong's body. Chapter 1650. You don't know your limits. On the platform, Bo Sameo frowned. This sword was obviously beyond Shi Dong's ability to withstand, and he had to stop it. At this time, a woman's figure descended from the sky and stepped into the martial pavilion. The moment the sword light struck, the woman yelled, and a gray pestle appeared in her hand, blocking the sword light with all her might. The power of the profound saint flowed on Yin Qingqing's body, and the pestle flashed with intense light. As the sword light struck, the pestle let out an ear-piercing sound, and the light suddenly collapsed. Yin Qingqing's hands were numb from the shock, and she stepped back. The blood in her body was in turmoil, and her face was somewhat pale. Senior sister. Shi Dong stood up. It was not easy for Yin Qingqing to withstand this sword. Ha, joining forces? Then let me see what you've learned from Qin Hao. Shi Lang still did not give up. He activated his sword technique, and saint power flowed into the sword seal in his hand. In the pavilion, sword chi raged, forming a terrible sword chi whirlwind. The sword wind whistled, and Shi Dong's expression changed. This power was not something that he and his senior sister could withstand. Shi Lang was taking advantage of his high cultivation level to go too far. However, there was no shame on Shi Lang's face. He looked at Shi Dong with disdain. His sword chi rolled up a terrible whirlwind, and he waved it at Shi Dong and Yin Qingqing arrogantly. Stop! Bo Sameo yelled. Along with this, a yin and yang palm suddenly flew out from somewhere in the pavilion. The saint power was extremely strong, and it slammed toward Shi Lang. As soon as the palm appeared, Shi Lang immediately felt the pressure sweeping over. He looked over and saw a young man with an extraordinary temperament standing there. It was him. Shi Lang's arrogant expression became serious. The spiritual pagoda's Swan Xiu was the only one who was qualified and strong enough to contend with him. It could even be said that Xuan Xiu's cultivation level was higher than his. Shi Lang naturally did not dare to be careless. Saint Power surged into the sword seal, and it changed direction, abandoning Shi Dong, and slashing toward the yin and yang palm. Boom! A deafening sound rang out. This palm strike caused the whirlwind of sword light to disperse, and landed heavily on Shi Lang's body. Although he blocked it with his sword seal, he was still pushed back more than 10 meters, and his figure was in a sorry state. Xuan Xiu. All the disciples looked at that person with admiration and a kind of fear in their eyes. Although Xuan Xiu's strength was tyrannical, he was not to be provoked. However, his character was even more than Shi Lang's. Humph! Shi Lang swallowed the blood in his throat. He already knew that Xuani was very strong, but after exchanging blows, it turned out to be more troublesome than he had imagined. However, Shi Lang refused to accept the fact that Shi Lang wanted to suppress him with a single palm strike. An even more violent sword intent gushed out. The sword imprint in Shi Lang's hand exploded with a resplendent light. The disciples felt as if the sword imprint had solidified into a physical entity. Following which, the sword imprint split apart, transforming into over 10 streams of light that blasted towards Bayan. A cold smile flashed across Tao Wu's face, and his expression was one of disdain. He stepped on the ground, and flames of the Wei burned on his body. A low roar of a qilin came from within his body, and everyone could hear it clearly. When beams of sword Dao light fell, Shi Dong could clearly see that the flames burning on Xuani's body formed a huge illusory image of a qilin divine beast, protecting it in the middle. Beams of sword Dao light entered the illusory image and merged with the qilin Dao fire, burning into nothingness. Shi Dong said. Shi Lang's expression also changed greatly. Was he that strong? Tao Wu's qilin soul forcibly withstood the attack of the soul essence sword mark. Even its Dao body could not be broken, so it was unscathed. Roar! At this moment, a berserk roar resounded. The gigantic qilin phantom moved as if it was flying, and in the blink of an eye, it had already arrived above Shi Lang's head. The beast palm that was wrapped in surging flames pressed down and stopped on Shi Lang's forehead. Shi Lang looked at the palm on his forehead. He was so scared that his face turned pale. His face was covered in cold sweat. Your swordsmanship isn't bad, but it's a pity that it's far inferior to my qilin Dao fire. Tao Wu withdrew his primordial soul, and the flames around him dissipated. He also moved his palm away from Shi Lang's forehead. He was just trying to scare Shi Lang. Of course, if this wasn't a competition between fellow disciples of the same sect, Shi Lang would have ceased to exist. At this moment, Shi Lang stood there in a daze as if he had lost his soul. He was intimidated by the shadow of the palm print. The other disciples looked at Xuan Xiong in awe. This was the true number one person among the younger generation of Taoism. Even someone as strong as Shi Lang of the Sword Valley was no match for him. If there was anyone in Taoism who could compete with Lu Guang of the Sky Striking Sect, it had to be Tao Wu. In the future, only Tao Wu was qualified to compete with Lu Guang. Thank you. Shi Dong stepped forward and said sincerely. Tao Wu suppressed Shi Lang and resolved the crisis for him. Moreover, Tao Wu was indeed strong and worthy of respect. Tao Wu glanced at Shi Dong and said coldly, "Trash." In the face of Shi Lang's repeated provocations, he didn't even dare to fight back. How could he be a disciple of Taoism? What nonsense are you talking about? Yin Qingqing said angrily. She naturally couldn't bear to see her junior brother being humiliated. Did I say something wrong? Tao Wu looked at Yin Qingqing coldly and said with a smile, "A man who didn't fight back and didn't talk back. What is he if not trash? How much resources did Qin Hao use for Taoism and waste on you two incompetent people? You really don't let him down. I feel tired for Qin Hao. Apologize to me." Shi Dong's face darkened and there seemed to be a fighting spirit between his brows. "Oh, you dare to fight back now?" Tao Wu was a little surprised that a useless person who didn't dare to face Shi Lang had the guts to face him. "You can humiliate me, but you can't humiliate my master. Apologize." Shi Dong shouted loudly. That person in the herb garden had shown him great kindness and had given him a new lease on life. The kindness of a teacher was like a father. If he didn't get this apology, Shi Dong would not hesitate to go against Qin Hao and attack Tao Wu. Even if he couldn't win, he would still fight. "Shi Dong, Qingqing, come back for dinner." At this time, a voice sounded in the air. Everyone looked up and found that Great Master Qin, of the herb garden, had come to the martial pavilion and was floating there. "Master, he slandered you. I will never let him go." Shi Dong resisted and couldn't suppress his desire to attack Tao Wu. Bo Sameo saw this and shrugged helplessly at Qin Hao. He couldn't be blamed for today's matter. "You don't have to come back to the herb garden to see me." Qin Hao didn't say much. He nodded at Bo Sameo and turned to fly back to the herb garden. "Master." Shi Dong knew that Qin Hao was angry. He hurriedly chased after him with Yin Qingqing and didn't forget to look back at Tao Wu. Tao Wu smiled frivolously and didn't avoid Shi Dong's gaze. He raised half of his pinky in the air and strode out of the martial pavilion, leaving a proud back view for everyone. "This kid." Bo Sameo shook his head and smiled bitterly. Tao Wu was indeed talented, but because of this, he was spoiled and didn't know how to be humble. After the small incident in the martial pavilion, all the disciples returned to their respective dojos. Shi Lang also returned to the Valley of Swords. He was prepared to teach Shi Dong a lesson today to win Shi Zhenhua's favor and show off his skills. But who would have thought that in the end, Bian would appear and steal the limelight, and even put Shi Lang in a very sorry state. Usually, the disciples of Taoism would always compare them to each other, arguing about who was the number one. After today, there would be no more argument. Tao Wu deserved to be the strongest in Taoism, but Shi Lang was labeled as the disgraceful number two. Chapter 1651. Qin Hao led the group back to the herb garden, and the disciples dispersed. Bo Sameo, the elder of the martial pavilion, thought for a moment and felt that it was necessary to report to the higher-ups. After all, what happened to Shi Dong was too shocking. First-grade spiritual root, third-grade spiritual power, and in less than 3 years, he entered the Saint realm from the early stage of elemental gathering realm. It was unbelievable. Bo Sameo did not know how Qin Hao did it. In the past, in the Taoist sect and even in the 5 realms of the East continent, such an improvement was extremely rare. Of course, this did not include the monstrous geniuses in the overlords. Those people were born with powerful bloodlines and abundant cultivation resources. The Taoist sect's manpower and physical strength could not be compared to the overlord. "Master, why don't you let me teach Tao Chun a lesson?" Shi Dong asked after returning to the herb garden. No one in the world could criticize Qin Hao in front of him. He would not allow it. "Can you beat him?" Qin Hao rolled his eyes at Shi Dong. Shi Dong was speechless. This was the truth. He could not even beat Shi Lang. "But I can't let him talk about you like that. A straight foot is not afraid of a crooked shadow. Do whatever you want." Qin Hao did not care at all. "Let's eat first. Drink more of the medicinal bone soup your senior sister made today. You have an important mission later." "Mission?" Shi Dong did not understand and looked at Yin Qingqing. Yin Qingqing said blankly, "Why are you looking at me?" Shi Dong grinned and buried his head in eating. His master never told anyone in advance when he had something to do, so his senior sister obviously did not know. Yin Qingqing's culinary skills were exquisite. Coming from a commoner family, she had learned how to cook since young. This meal made Shi Dong praise it endlessly. Looking at the clean stacks of empty plates, to be honest, the disciples of the herb garden did have some advantages that the disciples of other dojos did not have. Every meal was very nutritious. However, it was not like what Shi Lang and Bai An had said, where he had misappropriated a large amount of the Dao sect's resources. Usually, their meals consisted of herbs that Qin Hao had grown himself, and they were not herbs from the sect's herb garden. Although they didn't have the superb swordsmanship of the Sword Valley, the tyrannical martial arts of the Martial Pavilion, or the profound spells of the Spirit Pagoda, they had the most generous and selfless master in the world. After the meal, Qin cleaned up. Qin Hao and Shi Dong went to the courtyard and began to cultivate. Cultivating after meals had been a habit of theirs for the past few years. Qin did not complain about this. Although she would occasionally grumble, she was very clear about her own situation. Her martial arts would not be able to achieve great things. On the other hand, her master had put in so much effort to nurture Shi Dong. This proved that her junior brother was definitely outstanding in some way. "Master, what should I practice today?" Shi Dong asked. He had a vague feeling that Qin Hao's following standards would be very difficult. Martial veins, martial acupoints, qi si, spirit bones, qi harmonization, qi circulation, blood and flesh explosion. Shi Dong, you should know these subtle mysteries of the body like the back of your hand. I am an alchemist, so I am not good at attacking. However, every body of flesh and blood contains power that cannot be ignored. What I can do is to teach you the subtle methods of softening the flesh and power. Qin Hao said. Shi Dong nodded seriously. Martial artists had always paid attention to talent, the grade of martial arts, and the divine soldier's weapon. It was easy for them to neglect the details of the body, which happened to be his master's specialty. Shi Dong had followed his master for nearly 3 years. He did not dare to say that he was very good at alchemy, but in terms of the body, he was indeed very familiar with it. When you entered the Taoist sect, I asked you to familiarize yourself with the various medicinal powers and understand the flesh and blood within 2 years. I did not ask you to practice any cultivation methods or martial arts. It was only in the past half a month that I began to let you out. Tell me, what did you learn? Qin Hao asked. It's very wonderful, Shi Dong said longingly. Under the strict supervision of his master, he had tempered his physical body for 2 years. Every meridian, every spirit bone, when the vital qi circulated, that feeling was imprinted into his soul. However, he did not learn any martial arts. This was like a strong man who did not know how to throw a punch. He only had a strong physique, but he could not throw out the power he should have. However, in the past half a month, he had been cultivating in the Spirit Pagoda, the Martial Pavilion, and the military field. The power brought by the cultivation methods filled his body. It was very plentiful and enjoyable. Remember this feeling, but also forget it. Now, empty your mind and don't think about anything related to martial arts. Seriously search for the feeling of fullness in your body, and then try to see what kind of experience you will have. Qin Hao said. Okay. Shi Dong nodded, sat cross-legged, and closed his eyes. It was as if he was in an uninhabited place, and forgot everything related to martial arts. At this time, Qin Hao's eyes fell on Shi Dong. The will of the emperor quietly penetrated Shi Dong's soul, carefully feeling every subtle change in him. 2 years to familiarize himself with the body, and then a short time to experience the powerful pleasure brought by martial arts. Everything that Qin Hao had arranged was naturally reasonable. It was to pave the way for Shi Dong to awaken his bloodline. Now, whether Shi Dong could follow the wonderful feeling of fullness to awaken his bloodline depended on his own fortune. No, I can't do it. Shi Dong opened his eyes and patted his face with both hands. Master said it was simple, but it was too difficult to do. The state of forgetting everything was impossible to enter. The common people have innate spirit. The innate power of some creatures will be in a closed state for some reason. This requires you to go back to the beginning and dig out the innate power. Do you know why Master wants you to do this? Qin Hao became a little serious. I have innate power? Shi Dong was shocked. He understood immediately. Nodding, Qin Hao said, and it's a very strong innate power. You need to enter a state of nothingness to sense it, find it, and lead it back. Empty everything, forget everything, even your name, and try again. Okay. Shi Dong was a little excited. He knew that Master would not lie to him. He had always thought that he was a low-level martial artist, but there was innate power hidden in his body. How could Shi Dong not be excited about the powerful talent given by the heavenly Tao? Then what kind of power would his talent be? He closed his eyes again. Just like Qin Hao said, he had to empty everything and forget everything. Shi Dong tried hard, but the more he tried, the easier it was for his mind to tense up. After a long time, he finally returned to his initial state. Taking a deep breath, Shi Dong explored the state of nothingness that Qin Hao mentioned for the third time. In his mind, it was as if he had stepped into a vast and endless world. There were no creatures in this world. He even imagined himself becoming a part of this world, merging with it, communicating with it, and searching for the truth. Time passed little by little. Shi Dong's state became better and better. He was infinitely close to the state of nothingness that Qin Hao mentioned. He gradually discovered that his master's state of nothingness was too profound and mysterious. It seemed to be nothingness, but in reality there was. Everything was void, but in the void there was the truth of the great Tao. He could even feel the wind, the cold, the flames, the mountains, the rivers, and many other things that seemed to be non-existent but actually existed in this world of nothingness. Good comprehension. Qin Hao's emperors will silently invaded Shi Dong's mind power. What the other could feel, he could also feel. The descendant of senior brother Shi Mu was indeed very talented in martial arts. If Shi Dong could comprehend the general trend of the world in the state of nothingness, then he would not be far from the great Tao of Emperor. Of course, it was impossible for him to break through to the great Tao of Emperor, but at least after comprehending it, he would lay a foundation for the great Tao of Emperor in the future. Once his cultivation caught up, it would be much easier for Shi Dong to enter the great Tao of Emperor. Chapter 1652. As time passed, Shi Dong's state of nothingness became more and more stable. He had truly reached the state of selflessness, and his soul seemed to have turned into nothingness. His spirit swam freely in the world of nothingness, as if he had touched a kind of will. At this moment, a strange feeling also appeared in his body. A power that did not exist gradually condensed from nothingness into existence. The aura was weak, but Qin Hao could feel that this power was real. When a martial artist forgot everything, when his spirit returned to the beginning of his life, he could get closer to the Tao. There were 3,000 great Taos, including the way of man, the way of martial arts, the way of the saints, the way of life and death, and the way of the emperor. They were all derived from the great Taos, and the power they gave people was completely different. Only the power of the heavenly way was supreme. Qin Hao could not see what the heavenly way was, but at this moment, when his emperor will invaded Shi Dong's mind power, he vaguely had a new understanding of the great Taos. Shi Dong is addicted, he murmured. Qin Hao murmured softly. Although his spirit resonated with Shi Dong, he did not forget his goal. The disciple could be confused, but the master had to be clear-headed. Shi Dong had sunk into the 3,000 great paths and could not find his own path. If this continued, his bloodline would not be able to awaken. He had to create some pressure to force out his potential. With this in mind, Qin Hao's emperor will moved slightly. In an instant, in Shi Dong's spiritual world, the wind and clouds suddenly changed, as if there was a great Tao power forcefully reversing the universe. The world suddenly collapsed, the heavens and the earth rumbled, and the mountains and rivers below shattered. This sudden and terrifying scene immediately disturbed Sherdong. He felt that his spiritual world was collapsing. After all, his mind power had merged with nothingness. The blood in his body flowed backward, and his aura became chaotic. Sherdong's face was severely distorted, and his expression was pained. Blood flowed out of his nostrils, eyes, and ears as if he had suffered a terrible injury. "Master!" Enchantment screamed when she saw this scene. She did not understand why this was happening. Didn't he say he was cultivating? Sigh. Qin Hao sighed inwardly. He had failed and could not continue. Otherwise, Sherdong would not be able to withstand the pressure of his emperor will. Once his spirit completely collapsed, he would become an idiot. Dispersing the emperor will, Qin Hao stepped forward and pushed Sherdong's body. Sherdong was awakened, his face pale. "Cultivation complete," Qin Hao said. There was a trace of bleakness in his eyes. It seemed that it would not be easy to awaken the power of Sherdong's bloodline. "Master, have I disappointed you?" Sherdong could sense Qin Hao's emotions, but he had already tried his best. "It was too difficult. I'm not disappointed. Otherwise, I wouldn't have accepted you as my disciple. You have a long way to go. Xiao Yuanxi, go back and wash yourself," Qin Hao consoled. After saying that, he walked back into the room. Sherdong lowered his head to look at himself. There was a lot of dirt seeping out of his clothes, and his body gave off a strange smell. He said sullenly to Enchantment, "I must have made him unhappy. Hurry up and wash yourself. You're going to die from the stench." Enchantment covered her nose and left. Sherdong was bleeding from all 7 orifices. It scared her to death. In the pharmacy, Qin Hao looked at Sherdong's receding figure with a helpless expression. Even though he was Dendi of the East Continent and had extraordinary medical skills, he could not awaken his disciple's bloodline. Senior brother Shermu had really given him a difficult problem. At this moment, Qin Hao thought of Miori. If senior sister was still alive, she could use the flawless Dilly to guide Sherdong. Perhaps it would be easier to awaken Sherdong's bloodline. Unfortunately, senior sister had passed away for 5 years. Time flew by. In the blink of an eye, another 3 years had passed. It had been 8 years since Qin Hao came to the Taoist sect. During these 8 years, he focused on cultivating and teaching disciples in the southern heavens. However, he did not hear any news about Shaohan. He did not know how everyone was doing. Similarly, he had not contacted Western Liang for 8 years. Were Xiao Guo and Shuihan doing well? As for his father-in-law, he hoped that Xiao Yi would not be too worried. During these 8 years, Qin Hao had tried almost all methods to help Sherdong awaken his bloodline, but he failed again and again. However, he did not give up, nor could he give up. Since he had promised to take care of the Taoist sect on behalf of his senior brother, he had to teach a genius comparable to the descendant of an overlord force for the Taoist sect in the future. Sherdong was his best choice. While teaching disciples, Qin Hao did not neglect his own cultivation during these 8 years. He continued to use the 5-spirit earth qi of the southern heavens peak to constantly temper his Tao, making his emperor intent laws more and more perfect. However, as his Tao confirming power increased by 1 layer, the growth of his realm slowed down. It was not that Qin Hao did not have enough comprehension of the emperor's Tao, but that it was very difficult to hone it. It was not easy to become a flawless emperor. The last time he had broken through was 3 years ago. Now Qin Hao had not broken through to the 8th layer of the Tao confirming realm. However, he vaguely felt that he would soon break through. After the 8th layer, he would break through 1 more layer and become a Tao confirming emperor. In contrast, the progress of his 2 disciples was very obvious, especially Sherdong. He had grown by leaps and bounds and had broken through to the 4th layer of the profound sage realm. He was only 2 layers away from surpassing his master. After all, on the surface, Qin Hao was acting as a 6th-layer profound sage alchemist in the Taoist sect. The only pity was that Shi Dong's bloodline had not awakened. Qing Qing's realm was 1 level higher than Shi Dong's, but if they fought, she would not be Shi Dong's opponent. Although his bloodline had not awakened, his physical body had been tempered to the extreme by Qin Hao. He could be called a humanoid monster. The matter of the martial pavilion 3 years ago had caused a lot of waves in the Taoist sect. Shi Dong's rapid growth made the Taoist sect feel incredulous. Later, Bo Sameo reported to the upper echelons that the inner sect had sent people to investigate. Of course, it was not to investigate Qin Hao's theft of precious herbs. The herb garden was supervised by Elder Yu. Elder Yu was a person of virtue and prestige, and was an old minister of the Taoist sect. The 3 sect masters naturally trusted the person he appointed. This investigation was directed at Shi Dong. Elder Qi suspected that there was a mistake in Shi Dong's aptitude test. Logically speaking, it was impossible for him to step into the sage realm. However, no matter how the inner sect investigated, it was obvious that they could not find anything. Qin Hao vaguely dealt with all of them, and the matter was left unsettled. In the end, the upper echelons of the Taoist sect slowly got used to Qin Hao's excuses, even if they did not match up. As for Shi Dong, he had successfully attracted the attention of the Taoist sect and was appointed as a disciple of the inner sect. He had the same status as Bian, Shi Lang, and Bo Minghua. Qin Hao had expected such a result. In the world of martial arts, strength was the prerequisite to being respected. No matter what Shi Dong's aptitude was, since he had entered the sage realm and become one of the most outstanding disciples of the Taoist sect, he would naturally be valued by the sect. In the mountains to the north of Nanjiang City, ancient trees formed a forest. Demonic qi was rampant, and tyrannical great demons often appeared. In the mountains, there was a mine vein controlled by the city lord's mansion. It produced rare and precious ores that could be used to forge an extraordinary divine soldier. However, today, a major event happened here. The mine collapsed, and countless miners were killed or injured. Even the supervision camp set up by the city lord's mansion was buried in it. Only a few martial artists with powerful cultivation were lucky enough to escape. They were so scared that they almost lost their minds. This was because below the mine was a huge cemetery. In the center of the cemetery there was an ominous tomb. The Emperor's tomb. Chapter 1653. The appearance of the great Emperor's tomb shook the entire Nanjiang city. Even the surrounding areas were alarmed. Many sect forces wanted to send people into the graveyard to take a look at the solemn great Emperor's tomb and search for treasures of great value. Although they knew that the great Emperor's tomb was dangerous, this couldn't stop the powerhouses of the various sect forces. At this time, in the sky above the mountains in the north of Nanjiang City, there were cultivators from 3 forces moving in the air. Although they were far away, they were all moving very quickly towards the graveyard. Taisui Mountain, Striking Sky Sect, and Qilin Dao Sect were the 3 major sects surrounding Nanjiang City. Naturally, they couldn't let outsiders take the lead. They had to enter the graveyard as soon as possible and obtain the treasures of the great Emperor's tomb. Everyone, don't let your guard down. After entering, be prepared to deal with anything at any time. Bo Sameo cautioned them carefully as purple essence surged around him. This time, he was traveling with Shi Qing and Shi Zhenhua to lead the elite disciples of the Dao sect to explore the great Emperor's tomb. I naturally have the ability to deal with all dangers and can take care of the disciples of the Sword Valley. You should worry about the others. Shi Zhenhua glanced behind him, then immediately looked away. The 3 of them were enough to lead the disciples of the Dao sect on this trip, but Qin Hao had come along. What was the use of a profound sage alchemist? If there was danger, he wouldn't be able to take care of Qin Hao. It's not just the Sword Valley. Everyone here is a disciple of the Tao sect. We have the responsibility to bring everyone back safely. Shi Qing said. Don't worry, I will do my best. You, on the other hand, must pay attention to your personal safety. Shi Zhenhua smiled. Bo Sameo shook his head slightly and looked behind at Qin Hao sympathetically. The latter smiled faintly without a trace of worry on his face. The mine graveyard was very strange. It seemed to be affected by a powerful force. The higher one's martial cultivation, the easier it was to be restricted. Human sovereigns and high-level Yuan venerates couldn't enter at all. Only lower-level Yuan venerates could barely enter and not be isolated by the power of the graveyard. Otherwise, the 3 sect masters of the Tao sect would have come personally to lead the team today. Unfortunately, the 3 sect masters had tried. The Taisui monarch and the striking Tao emperor couldn't enter either. Therefore, Shi Qing and the other 2 were arranged to lead the team. Of course, the Taoist sect was not the only one that was sent to explore the cemetery today. The Void Striking sect and the Taisui Mountain had also sent out their elite disciples and elders. It seemed that the upper echelons of the 3 sects had secretly discussed that each sect would send out the same number of disciples so that no one would have too much of an advantage. Even so, once they entered the cemetery, friction was inevitable. After all, they were all aiming for the treasures. As for the final result, it would depend on their own method. Actually, Qin Hao didn't have to come. He was worried about Shi Dong and Qing Qing, so he asked to come along. Shi Dong and Qing Qing were appointed as the elite disciples of the cabinet. They were responsible for entering the cemetery on behalf of Haotian Taoism. Moreover, Shi Mu was the only descendant of his senior brother. Qin Hao would never allow anything to happen to him. As for whether or not he could enter the tomb, Qin Hao wasn't worried at all. He scanned the tomb with his emperor's will and found that the power that sealed the tomb was very weak. Obviously, Emperor Yuan, who was buried inside, had a cultivation level far lower than his. It wasn't a problem for him to block a human sovereign, but how could he block Qin Hao, who was comparable to a Tao emperor? If he entered the tomb, it would be a no-man's land. However, for the 3 sects of Nanjiang City, as well as many other sects, the emperor was so high and mighty. Anything left behind by the emperor during his lifetime would be regarded as a treasure and would be fought over. The 3 lower-level Yuan venerates led the team forward. Soon, the team arrived at the location. After everyone landed, they found that the powerhouses of Taisui Mountain and Void Strike sect had already arrived. They were standing at the entrance of the cemetery, as if waiting for the Tao sect team to arrive. After all, today's exploration of the tomb was agreed upon by the upper echelons of the 3 sections. It couldn't be broken. Elder Shi Qing, you are here. An outstanding young elder of the Void Strike sect stepped forward and greeted them. Qin Hao looked over and saw that it was Elder Wu, Lu Guang's master. Yes. Shi Qing nodded. Sorry to have kept everyone waiting. Haha, it's all right. Actually, we just arrived. A large number of martialists in golden robes came over from another position. Among them, a particularly tall young man laughed loudly. He was obviously the leader of the Taisui Mountain team this time. Elder Shi Qing, Elder Song, the tomb is full of dangers. What do the 2 of you think? Do you want to team up with the Void Strike sect? Elder Wu smiled. It is precisely because it is full of dangers that it is the best place to test the disciples. There is no need for us to go together. Elder Song of Taisui Mountain said with a sharp glint in his eyes. Team up? He couldn't trust this person surnamed Wu. The same goes for the Tao sect, Shi Qing said politely. Clearly, he wasn't willing to travel with the Void Strike sect. Who would the treasures belong to if they found them? My master has good intentions. I was afraid that you wouldn't appreciate it, yet you actually don't appreciate it. Ha ha. Lu Guang advises the disciples of the two sects that if you don't have a certain degree of confidence in your own strength, you shouldn't go in and throw your lives away. Why don't you return to where you came from? Said a dignified disciple beside Elder Wu. It had been 6 years since the Nanjiang City examination ceremony. Lu Guang was now in his early 20s, and his temperament was even more extraordinary. Moreover, the aura of a genius gave off an invisible pressure. Even when facing the elders of Taoism and Taishui Mountain, he was still very tough and his aura was not inferior at all. You're right. If you don't have a certain degree of confidence in your own strength, it's better not to go in. That's why the disciples of the Taishui Mountain want to go in. We have absolute confidence. At that moment, a young man among the disciples of the Taishui Mountain stood out. Although he was wearing a noble golden robe like the other disciples, this disciple had a black jade belt around his waist. His eyes were bright, and he gave off a natural superior aura. The other disciples also had a white jade belt around their waist. Moreover, they looked at this young man with eyes full of admiration. Dui Tianchang, the grandson of the old master of the Taishui Mountain and the son of the Taishui Emperor, was known to be unparalleled in the Nanjiang region. His extraordinary aura was not inferior to Lu Guang's. With the appearance of Dui Tianchang, whether it was the disciples of the Tao sect or the Void Strike sect, they all felt a sense of pressure. However, the Void Strike sect had an arrogant genius like Lu Guang at the front, so they were not afraid of the son of the Taishui Emperor. In contrast, the disciples of the Tao sect could not raise their head. Shi Lang, who was known as the number 1 in the Sword Valley, felt a sense of shame the moment he faced Lu Guang and Dui Tianchang. He did not dare to look at the two of them directly for fear of attracting their attention. He well said, "In that case, I think the two of you can go back on the spot. With me around, the Tao sect has no room for you to show off." At that moment, Tao Wu stepped out and stood proudly in front of Lu Guang and Dui Tianchang. In an instant, the aura of the three geniuses was released at the same time. An incomparably sharp aura seemed to collide invisibly. Tao Wu. The disciples of the Tao sect were delighted. Tao Wu was right. He was not as unbearable as Lu Guang and Dui Tianchang thought. "What's your name?" Lu Guang's gaze was sharp as he stared at Tao Wu. "Tao Wu." Tao Wu raised his head proudly and answered, You're very arrogant. I just don't know if your strength is as big as your words," Lu Guang said in a low voice. His eyes flashed with fighting spirit, and he was slightly excited. "You'll see if I'm capable or not very soon," Tao Wu said fearlessly and glanced at Dui Tianchang. He had long wanted to learn a few moves from the son of the Taishui Emperor. Chapter 1654. Dui Tianchang sized up Tao Wu with a calm expression. He had heard of the name of Taoism's Swan and I. Even though he was not a direct descendant of the Swan and I, he had displayed extraordinary talent since he was young and was favored by Elder Swan Qing. However, Tao Wu was only outstanding in Tao sect and Dui Tianchang did not take him seriously. "See you at the cemetery." Lu Guang's tone was slightly threatening. If there was a chance, he looked forward to competing with Tao Wu. At this moment, the higher-ups of the three sects were looking at their most outstanding juniors. Before entering the tomb, they had already ignited the flames of war. There would definitely be an extremely intense competition between the three of them in the future. Alright, today's main purpose is to explore the tomb. If you have the energy to quarrel, why don't you stay at the cemetery? Elder Wu said. Then, he looked at Chu Qing and Elder Song and said, "Since the three sects are here, let's enter as soon as possible. If we delay any longer, it will be disadvantageous to us." "That's right, let's enter the cemetery." Elder Song strode forward and led the disciples of Taishui Mountain forward. Chu Qing and Bo Sameo looked at each other and followed. Now that the mine had collapsed, a vast and endless sinkhole had appeared in front of them. That area was mysterious and full of danger. It was the target of the exploration. The teams of the three sects advanced at the same time and tacitly kept a distance from each other. At this moment, in the Tao sect team, Shi Dong was following beside Qin Hao. He appeared to be very quiet and did not attract anyone's attention. Although his martial arts realm had improved rapidly in recent years, he was still no match for Shi Lang and Tao Wu in Tao sect. How could he attract the attention of the other two sects? Lu Guang and Dui Tianchong were very proud. They did not even look at the other disciples of Tao sect. It seemed that in Tao sect, only Tao Wu could barely fight with them. Feeling the pressure? Qin Hao asked in a low voice. Just now, Shi Dong was very low-key. Although he did not say anything, his gaze was fixed on Dui Tianchong and Lu Guang. His expression was somewhat complicated. It seemed to be envy but also a desire to fight. Yes, Lu Guang, Dui Tianchong, and Tao Wu are all very strong. Shi Dong answered honestly. If you meet them at the cemetery, do you have the confidence to fight them? Qin Hao smiled and transmitted his voice. I may not be a match for them. Shi Dong smiled foolishly. You're humble. Qin Hao could tell from Shi Dong's words that he might not be a match for him, but there was another possibility. In all fairness, Shi Dongdi did not have the advantage in a direct confrontation. His foundation was weak, and he started late. On the other hand, Dui Tianchong and Bai An grew up with a golden spoon in their mouths. Elder Wu's power continued to weaken, and no one knew how much of his power he could retain in the end. They had to speed up, obtain useful things, and then leave safely with the disciples. As he spoke, Elder Song led the people of the Taisui Mountain and left through the western region without saying goodbye. He seemed to be in a hurry. Even he knew that the longer they stayed in the cemetery, the more dangerous their lives would be. Let's go. Shi Zhenhua waved his hand and the people of the Tao sect advanced straight ahead. The three sects went in different directions and instantly lost contact. This was good too. At least there wouldn't be any disputes if they encountered treasures along the way. As for who could reach the central region of the Dharch tomb, it would depend on their own abilities. In the vast cemetery, gray fog lingered like a haze. The three teams entered and soon disappeared. But no matter which sect they were from, they all flew towards the Dharch tomb at an extremely fast speed. Shi Dong, Qingqing, follow me closely. Qin Hao urged. This cemetery was indeed very oppressive. The rancid smell underground made him very uncomfortable. This kind of thing was definitely not for decoration. However, Qin Hao didn't feel any sense of crisis. As he expected, Emperor Yuan, who was buried in the cemetery, had a lower cultivation level than him. The power suppressing this place clearly belonged to the laws of the Emperor's will. He couldn't break through to the human sovereign realm, so it didn't have any effect on Qin Hao. As for why he felt uncomfortable, it was probably related to cultivation. Emperor Yuan, who died here, seemed to have cultivated the Emperor's path very differently. After some time, suddenly, the sound of a fierce battle came from the east and west, mixed with the frightened shouts of disciples. The sound was very clear. The sound came through the fog. The Taisui Mountain and the Void Strike sect were obviously in trouble. Immediately, the disciples of the Tao sect became vigilant. Many people subconsciously pulled out their sharp sword. Their minds were highly tense. Pairs of anxious eyes stared at the gray fog, fearing that some monsters would appear. Don't be nervous, follow me, Shi Zhenhua said. He slowed down, not daring to continue to force his way through. After all, there was an emperor buried in the cemetery. Junior brothers, relax. With Master and the elders here, it'll be fine. Shi Lang cooperated. At this moment, he was also gloating. The people of the Taisui Mountain and the Void Strike sect seemed to have encountered something. Hearing the screams, they seemed to be frightened. They could only blame themselves for being unlucky. The Dao sect was much quieter. Something seemed to be grabbing his leg. Shi Lang's heel suddenly froze in place. He couldn't move. At this moment, he turned around and looked down. The moment his gaze fell, his eyes suddenly widened. His mouth opened so wide that a fist could be stuffed in. His throat was dry. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't make any sound for a while. It wasn't until 2 seconds later that an earth-shattering scream shook the air. Sword light suddenly burst out from Shi Lang's hand. With the sword mark in his hand, it was mixed with turbulent sword energy. He stabbed it vertically into the ground. The thing that grabbed his leg was a pair of pale hands. Shi Lang saw half of a head emerging from the soil. It was incomparably ugly. Its facial features were rotten like a ghost. Although martial artists were bold and often faced death, they still couldn't help but be frightened when they suddenly saw such a thing. Especially when the head was rotten and bloody, the hands that grabbed Shi Lang's leg were extremely strong. It couldn't be explained by common sense at all. Panic immediately swept through his heart and spread to his soul. Almost instinctively, he erupted with all his strength and stabbed it. No matter what it was, in short, it was enough to stab it to death. Chapter 1655. A dazzling radiance burst forth from the sword mark as it pierced into the soil. Sword chi wreaked havoc and smelly blood splattered everywhere. This strike completely destroyed the rotten corpse buried below. The ground within a radius of more than 10 meters was also cut into countless sword marks. The broken head was separated from the dismembered corpse. As the sword mark was pulled out, it flicked Shi Lang's face. The tongue rolled out from the damaged mouth, the worm-stained eyes drooped from the eye sockets, and the head was connected to pitch-black blood vessels. The stench was simply maddening and suffocating. Shi Lang was scared out of his wits. He retreated awkwardly and fell to the ground with a frightened expression. He didn't consider the consequences and didn't have time to care about his fellow disciples. He only knew that he would destroy everything with a single strike. The devastating sword chi almost accidentally injured the bystanders. "Why are you panicking?" Shi Zhenhua walked over and lifted Shi Lang from the ground. It was just a rotten corpse, but he didn't seem frightened at all. "I'm sorry, master." Shi Lang's lips trembled as he suppressed the fear in his heart. Perhaps because of the sword chi, pale palms kept reaching out and pushing away the soil. A large number of rotten corpses began to crawl out, and the number was increasing. When Shi Zhenhua saw this, he stomped on the ground. Immediately, a layer of turbulent essence chi burst forth from the soles of his feet and swept out like a gust of wind, destroying all the rotten corpses. "Do you see that? They can't even withstand a single blow. Ordinary people can also be killed easily. Maintain the formation and continue moving forward," Shi Zhenhua ordered. He realized that the essence chi in his body had weakened significantly with this stomp. It no longer had the lethality of a Yuan venerate and was about the same as a high-level Yuan monarch. This wasn't a place to stay for long. The disciples of the Dao sect leaned on each other and tightened their formation as they continued to move forward. Along the way, there were constantly dead spirits emerging from the ground, but they were easily destroyed by the disciples. These rotten corpses only had frightening faces. At first glance, one's vision wasn't restricted, but they didn't pose much of a threat. At most, they were slightly stronger than ordinary people, but they couldn't hinder the progress of the cultivators. Slowly, everyone got used to it, and began to enjoy killing spirits, treating it as a form of cultivation. Qin Hao had also killed some dead spirit. However, he realized that the situation was not as optimistic as it seemed. The deeper he went into the cemetery, the stronger the defense of the dead spirits and their physiques became. If the dead spirits that were killed in the periphery were stronger than ordinary people, now the disciples of the Tao sect had to release stronger vital qi to kill them in one strike. It could be predicted that the situation and the dead spirits. This wasn't the worst. There was another problem that was more important. The disciples had limited stamina and vitality, but the dead spirits didn't fear death and didn't know fatigue. They constantly came out and interfered with the group's progress. The living would sooner or later collapse from exhaustion. Just as Qin Hao had predicted, after walking for about half a day, the situation became worse. The disciples could no longer feel the thrill of killing the dead souls. They gradually became numb, tired, and exhausted. Their physical strength and yuan qi were rapidly depleting. Including Shi Zhenhua and the other two, their condition was not as good as when they had just entered the graveyard. Many disciples with weaker cultivation were about to lose their strength to continue fighting. I think the team should be split into 2 or 3 groups. Let's go in different directions. Shi Zhenhua held a sharp sword in his hand. Sword light swept across and cut a skeleton into pieces. As early as 4 hours ago, he had stopped using yuan qi and switched to using a weapon. The others were the same. Because there were too many dead spirits, they had to preserve their essence qi. Moreover, Shi Zhenhua had a feeling that the more living people gathered, the more dead spirits they would attract. To reduce the pressure, they should disperse the aura of the living people. I believe you can feel it too. The dead spirits are attracted by the aura of the living. I suggest that Shi Qing and I lead a group of disciples. Sameo, you and Qin Hao will go together. This way, we will have a better chance to go deeper and reach the Emperor's tomb before Taisui Mountain and Void striking sect. Shi Zhenhua said. He looked at Shi Qing. It would be better if he could deepen his relationship with Shi Qing today. I don't agree. Shi Qing said. If the team is split, our strength will be divided. You, me, and Sameo all have the ability to protect ourselves. What about the disciples? Not only that. Her beautiful eyes glanced at Qin Hao as she continued. Qin Hao's cultivation isn't that much stronger than the other disciples. Sameo alone has to bear more pressure. Bo Sameo nodded. He agreed with what Shi Qing said. It was not that they despised Qin Hao's low cultivation. It was just that there was a great risk in splitting the team. After all, in the endless graveyard, not only were there endless dead spirits, there were also people from Taisui Mountain and Void striking sect. Once they split up, it would be even more troublesome if they bumped into them. What can you do? Shi Zhenhua's suggestion was not accepted. He looked at Qin Hao coldly. If he knew it would be like this, he would have asked the other elders to come. Any one of the outer elders would be better than this alchemist. Sorry, it seems like I have become a burden. Qin Hao ignored Shi Zhenhua and said to the other two. Let's not be calculative at a time like this. After all, even the 3 sect masters don't know the specific situation inside the graveyard. Shi Qing's tone was somewhat helpless. Perhaps they shouldn't have come. After all, a Thearcha's tomb was the last place where a Thearcha's dignity was buried. How could it be invaded wantonly? Boom. Shi Qing had just said this when a loud explosion was heard from the front. The disciples could see through the hazy fog that there was a huge tombstone with inscriptions. Obviously, this huge tomb was much bigger than the small mounds of earth where the dead spirits were buried. Perhaps a powerhouse was buried in this huge tomb. At that moment, as the tombstone exploded, a pitch-black figure clad in broken armor slowly stood up. It was very tall and was riding a ferocious beast mount made of bones. Suddenly, a terrifying and dangerous aura surged over. Shi Zhenhua, Shi Qing, and Bo Sameo exclaimed at the same time when they saw this figure. Yuan Venerate! Although it was dead, the deathly aura it exuded was indeed that of a Yuan Venerate powerhouse. Furthermore, it was a high-level Yuan Venerate. Even if they were in the outside world, they definitely wouldn't be a match for it, let alone in the graveyard where the cultivation bases of Shurqing and the others were suppressed. This was really troublesome. Let's go quickly. Shi Zhenhua became extremely nervous in an instant. A high-level undead spirit wasn't something he could fight against. Even Shurqing and Bo Sameo wouldn't be able to do so. Unfortunately, they couldn't escape. The undead powerhouse riding the ferocious skeletal beast seemed to have a life of its own as it slowly unsheathed the sword at its waist. Under the armor, a strange shriek was heard. It sounded like a general giving orders on the battlefield when it was still alive. As soon as it gave the order, countless undead warriors riding small ferocious skeletal beasts climbed out from behind it. They held halberds in their hands as they lined up in a formation and charged toward the disciples. Rumble! The ground ahead shook as if an army was advancing. The overwhelming killing intent made the disciples' scalps go numb. They had never seen such a battle before. However, the path was blocked. If they wanted to break through, they would have to face this undead army. Chapter 1656. The hearts of the Taoist disciples were beating violently. Under the pressure of the battle formation, they felt as if their breathing was about to stop. Before they set off, they knew that the tomb was dangerous and had thought of 100 kinds of risk. They were also prepared to fight with the Taisui Mountain and the Air Strike sect, but they never expected to encounter such a situation. The undead army surged forward like a tide. The tattered corpses did not know what fear was. They only knew how to devour everything. However, even if a living person could be killed with a sword, these corpses would still continue to attack even if their heads were cut off and their bodies were cut in half. Unless they were completely destroyed, they would still stab their rusty blades into the bodies of the Taoist disciples even if they were only left with a crippled hand. How can there be such things that can't be killed? The number is so shocking. It shouldn't be. It's over. Everyone might not be able to leave after this trip. The disciples were in despair. This was the first time they realized that death was so close to them. It turned out that living was so wonderful. Of course, there were also some people with strong wills and strong belief. They were not frightened by the undead. Among the disciples, there was one person who was running as if he was flying. Flames raged all over his body. When he ran, he was like a fierce Qilin. He directly charged towards the undead army. Xuan Xiu let out a low roar. He gathered soul fire in his palms and blasted it out continuously. Wherever he passed, the undead army collapsed and was unstoppable. He was not the only one. Besides Xuan Xiu, Shi Dong held a sharp sword. His vital qi covered the blade with a layer of orange radiance. The holy light wreaked havoc, and batch after batch of undead fell under the sword light. Sameo. Shi Zhenhua and Bo Sameo looked at each other. The two of them rose into the air and directly flew over the undead army. They charged towards the undead general riding on the skeleton. The undead general seemed to have retained a trace of its will and was commanding the battle. If it was not stopped, the disciples would not be able to pass through safely. Chu-san, take the disciples and leave first. At this time, Shurqing also made her move. Vital qi surged around her body as she caught up with Shi Zhenhua and Bo Sameo. The three of them formed seals and beams of light continuously blasted towards the undead general's head. No matter what, they had to withstand it. All of you, follow me. Qin Hao knew that the situation was critical. He looked around and quickly found the weakness of the undead army. He grabbed Yinqingqing with one hand and used his other hand to continuously release profound sage-level Yuan Qi. He led all the disciples of the Taoism sect and stabbed into the undead army like a sharp dagger. Chapter 1657. Master, what should we do? Dong raised his palms above his head as his sacred power continuously poured into the formation light. The pressure from above was getting stronger and stronger, and the formation would break at any time. Qin Hao took out 2 talismans from his sleeve and handed them to Dong. Elder Qi gave them to me before we set off. They should be useful. Why didn't you take them out earlier? Baiyan reprimanded and reached out to grab one. Elder Qi of the inner sect was proficient in talisman techniques and was at the 8th level Yuan Venerate. It might not be effective against the undead battle generals, but it was more than enough to blast open a way out. Baiyan did not suspect anything. The talismans must have been inscribed by Elder Qi. He was only worried about how many people could escape. There were too many undead spirits, so it was impossible for all the disciples to escape safely. It all depended on their luck. The formation light continued to weaken as countless rotting corpses piled up like mountains of corpses in the void. The dense, deathly aura penetrated the boundary, which became thinner and thinner until it exploded with a loud bang. The formation light disintegrated, and in an instant, the black mass of undead bodies fell frantically, as if filling up the world. Now, throw it out, Qin Hao shouted. Dong and Baiyan poured their energy into the talismans in their hands. They didn't even look at whether the lines on the talismans had been activated. They shouted and threw the talismans directly at the mountain of corpses falling from above. At the same time, inside Qin Hao's divine soul, the Emperor's will radiated outwards. Turbulent Emperor's soul energy stirred up the space, and in an instant, turbulence rose in all directions. Dust and dirt flew into the air, and the disciples were unable to stand steadily. All of them closed their eyes, and their cheeks were slapped by the turbulence. It was as if there were countless flames exploding in all directions, and earth-shattering rumbles resounded one after another. The power of the talismans seemed to be more turbulent than expected. Had Elder Qi's cultivation improved? No one doubted Qin Hao. All the disciples were only grateful to Elder Qi. He was worthy of being an old minister of the Tao sect. The disciples had left home for a long time, yet he still remembered them. In contrast, Zhenhua was a disgrace to the Tao sect. He wasn't worthy of being Elder Qi's disciple. The sound of the explosion was deafening. Although it only lasted for a few seconds, the disciples were dumbfounded when they opened their eyes again. With the location where they gathered as the center, everything within a kilometer had been reduced to nothingness. How many undead spirits had those 2 talismans killed?